The tale of a youth who set out to learn what fear was. A father had 2 sons, of whom the eldest was clever and bright, and always knew what he was about. But the youngest was stupid, and couldn't learn or understand anything, so much so that those who saw him exclaimed, "What a burden he'll be to his father!" Now, when there was anything to be done, the eldest had always to do it. But if something was required later, or in the night time, and the way led through the churchyard or some such ghostly place, he always replied, "Oh, no, father, nothing will induce me to go there. It makes me shudder," for he was afraid. Or, when they sat of an evening around the fire telling stories which made one's flesh creep, the listeners sometimes said, "Oh, it makes one shudder." The youngest sat in a corner, heard the exclamation, and could not understand what it meant. "They are always saying it makes one shudder. It makes one shudder. Nothing makes me shudder. It's probably an art quite beyond me." Now it happened that his father said to him one day, "Hearken, you there in the corner, you are growing big and strong, and you must learn to earn your own bread. Look at your brother, what pains he takes, but all the money I've spent on your education is thrown away." "My dear father," he replied, "I will gladly learn. In fact, if it were possible, I should like to learn to shudder. I don't understand that a bit yet." The eldest laughed when he heard this, and thought to himself, "Good heavens, what a ninny my brother is! He'll never come to any good. As the twig is bent, so is the tree inclined." The father sighed, and answered him, "You'll soon learn to shudder, but that won't help you to make a living." Shortly after this, when the sexton came to pay them a visit, the father broke out to him, and told him what a bad hand his youngest son was at everything. He knew nothing, and learned nothing. Only think, when I asked him how he purposed gaining a livelihood, he actually asked to be taught to shudder. "If that's all he wants," said the sexton, "I can teach him that. Just you send him to me. I'll soon polish him up." The father was quite pleased with the proposal, because he thought, "It will be a good discipline for the youth." And so the sexton took him into his house, and his duty was to toll the bell. After a few days he woke him at midnight, and bade him rise and climb into the tower and toll. "Now, my friend, I'll teach you to shudder," thought he. He stole forth secretly in front, and when the youth was up above, and had turned round to grasp the bell rope, he saw, standing opposite the hole of the belfry, a white figure. "Who's there?" he called out, but the figure gave no answer, and neither stirred nor moved. "Answer," cried the youth, "or begone. You have no business here at this hour of the night." But the sexton remained motionless, so that the youth might think that it was a ghost. The youth called out the second time, "What do you want here? Speak if you are an honest fellow, or I'll knock you down the stairs." The sexton thought, "He can't mean that in earnest," so gave forth no sound, and stood as though he were made of stone. Then the youth shouted out to him the third time, and as that too had no effect, he made a dash at the spectre and knocked it down the stairs, so that it fell about 10 steps and remained lying in a corner. Thereupon he tolled the bell, went home to bed without saying a word, and fell asleep. The sexton's wife waited a long time for her husband, but he never appeared. At last she became anxious, and woke the youth and asked, "Don't you know where my husband is? He went up to the tower in front of you." "No," answered the youth, "but someone stood on the stairs up there, just opposite the trapdoor in the belfry, and because he wouldn't answer me or go away, I took him for a rogue and knocked him down. You'd better go and see if it was he. I should be much distressed if it were." The wife ran and found her husband, who was lying groaning in a corner with his leg broken. She carried him down and then hurried with loud protestations to the youth's father. "Your son has been the cause of a pretty misfortune," she cried. "He threw my husband downstairs so that he broke his leg. Take the good-for-nothing wretch out of our house." The father was horrified, hurried to the youth, and gave him a scolding. "What unholy pranks are these? The evil one must have put them into your head." "Father," he replied, "only listen to me. I am quite guiltless." He stood there in the night like one who meant harm. I didn't know who it was, and warned him 3 times to speak or be gone. "Oh," groaned the father, "you bring me nothing but misfortune. Get out of my sight. I won't have anything more to do with you." "Yes, father, willingly. Only wait till daylight. Then I'll set out and learn to shudder, and in that way I shall be master of an art which will gain me a living." "Learn what you will," said the father. "It's all one to me. Here are $50 for you. Set forth into the wide world with them. But see you tell no one where you come from or who your father is, for I am ashamed of you." "Yes, father, whatever you wish, and if that's all you ask, I can easily keep it in mind." When day broke, the youth put the $50 into his pocket, set out on the hard high road, and kept muttering to himself, "If I could only shudder! If I could only shudder!" Just at this moment, a man came by who heard the youth speaking to himself, and when they had gone on a bit and were in sight of the gallows, the man said to him, "Look, there is the tree where 7 people have been hanged and are now learning to fly. Sit down under it and wait till nightfall, and then you'll pretty soon learn to shudder." "If that's all I have to do," answered the youth, "it's easily done. But if I learn to shudder so quickly, then you shall have my $50. Just come back to me tomorrow morning early." Then the youth went to the gallows tree and sat down underneath it, and waited for the evening, and because he felt cold, he lit himself a fire. But at midnight it got so chill that in spite of the fire he couldn't keep warm. And as the wind blew the corpses one against the other, tossing them to and fro, he thought to himself, "If you are perishing down here by the fire, how those poor things up there must be shaking and shivering." And because he had a tender heart, he put up a ladder, which he climbed, unhooked one body after the other, and took down all the 7. Then he stirred the fire, blew it up, and placed them all round in a circle, that they might warm themselves. But they sat there and did not move, and the fire caught their clothes. Then he spoke, "Take care, or I'll hang you up again." But the dead men did not hear, and let their rags go on burning. Then he got angry, and said, "If you aren't careful yourselves, then I can't help you, and I don't mean to burn with you." And he hung them up again in a row. Then he sat down at his fire and fell asleep. On the following morning the man came to him, and, wishing to get his $50, said, "Now you know what it is to shudder." "No," he answered, "how should I? Those fellows up there never opened their mouths, and were so stupid that they let those few old tatters they have on their bodies burn." Then the man saw he wouldn't get his $50 that day, and went off, saying, "Well, I'm blessed if I ever met such a person in my life before." The youth went too on his way, and began to murmur to himself, "Oh, if I could only shudder! If I could only shudder!" A carrier who was walking behind him heard these words, and asked him, "Who are you?" "I don't know," said the youth. "Where do you hail from?" "I don't know." "Who's your father?" "I mayn't say." "What are you constantly muttering to yourself?" "Oh," said the youth, "I would give worlds to shudder, but no one can teach me." "Stuff and nonsense," spoke the carrier. "Come along with me, and I'll soon put that right." The youth went with the carrier, and in the evening they reached an inn, where they were to spend the night. Then, Just as he was entering the room, he said again, quite aloud, "Oh, if I could only shudder! If I could only shudder!" The landlord, who heard this, laughed and said, "If that's what you're sighing for, you shall be given every opportunity here." "Oh, hold your tongue," said the landlord's wife. "So many people have paid for their curiosity with their lives. It were 1,000 pities if those beautiful eyes were never again to behold daylight." But the youth said, "No matter how difficult, I insist on learning it. Why, that's what I've set out to do." He left the landlord no peace till he told him that in the neighborhood stood a haunted castle, where one could easily learn to shudder if one only kept watch in it for 3 nights. The king had promised the man who dared to do this thing his daughter as wife, and she was the most beautiful maiden under the sun. There was also much treasure hid in the castle, guarded by evil spirits, which would then be free, and was sufficient to make a poor man more than rich. Many had already gone in, but so far none had ever come out again. So the youth went to the king and spoke. "If I were allowed, I should much like to watch for 3 nights in the castle." The king looked at him, and because he pleased him, he said, "You can ask for 3 things, none of them living, and those you may take with you into the castle." Then he answered, "Well, I shall beg for a fire, a turning lathe, and a carving bench with the knife attached." On the following day, the king had everything put into the castle, and when night drew on, the youth took up his position there, lit a bright fire in one of the rooms, placed the carving bench with the knife close to it, and sat himself down on the turning lathe. "Oh, if I could only shudder," he said, "but I shan't learn it here either." Toward midnight he wanted to make up the fire, and as he was blowing up a blaze, he heard a shriek from a corner. "Oh, me-oh, how cold we are!" "You fools," he cried. "Why do you scream? If you are cold, come and sit at the fire and warm yourselves." And as he spoke, 2 huge black cats sprang fiercely forward and sat down, one on each side of him, and gazed wildly at him with their fiery eyes. After a time, when they had warmed themselves, they said, "Friend, shall we play a little game of cards?" "Why not?" he replied, "but first let me see your paws." Then they stretched out their claws. "Ha!" said he, "what long nails you've got! Wait a minute, I must first cut them off." Thereupon he seized them by the scruff of their necks, lifted them on to the carving bench, and screwed down their paws firmly. "After watching you narrowly," said he, "I no longer feel any desire to play cards with you." And with these words he struck them dead and threw them out into the water. But when he had thus sent the 2 of them to their final rest, and was again about to sit down at the fire, out of every nook and corner came forth black cats and black dogs with fiery chains in such swarms that he couldn't possibly get away from them. They yelled in the most ghastly manner, jumped upon his fire, scattered it all, and tried to put it out. He looked on quietly for a time, but when it got beyond a joke, he seized his carving knife and called out, "Be off, you rabble-root!" and let fly at them. Some of them fled away, and the others he struck dead and threw them out into the pond below. When he returned, he blew up the sparks of the fire once more and warmed himself. And as he sat thus, his eyes refused to keep open any longer, and a desire to sleep stole over him. Then he looked around him and beheld in the corner a large bed. "The very thing," he said, and laid himself down in it. But when he wished to close his eyes, the bed began to move by itself, and ran all round the castle. "Capital," he said, "only a little quicker." Then the bed sped on, as if drawn by 6 horses, over thresholds and stairs, up this way and down that. All of a sudden, crash, crash! With a bound it turned over, upside down, and lay like a mountain on the top of him. But he tossed the blankets and pillows in the air, emerged from underneath, and said, "Now anyone who has the fancy for it may go a drive," lay down at his fire, and slept till daylight. In the morning the king came, and when he beheld him lying on the ground, he imagined the ghosts had been too much for him, and that he was dead. Then he said, "What a pity! And such a fine fellow he was." The youth heard this, got up, and said, "It's not come to that yet." Then the king was astonished, but very glad, and asked how it had fared with him. "First rate," he answered, "and now I've survived the one night, I shall get through the other 2 also." The landlord, when he went to him, opened his eyes wide and said, "Well, I never thought to see you alive again. Have you learned now what shuddering is?" "No," he replied. "It's quite hopeless. If someone could only tell me how to." The second night he went up again to the old castle, sat down at the fire, and began his old refrain, "If I could only shudder." As midnight approached, a noise and din broke out, at first gentle but gradually increasing. Then all was quiet for a minute, and at length, with a loud scream, half of a man dropped down the chimney and fell before him. "Hi, up there!" shouted he. "There's another half wanted down here." "That's not enough." Then the din commenced once more. There was a shrieking and a yelling, and then the other half fell down. "Wait a bit," he said. "I'll stir up the fire for you." When he had done this and again looked around, the 2 pieces had united, and a horrible-looking man sat on his seat. "Come," said the youth, "I didn't bargain for that. The seat is mine." The man tried to shove him away, but the youth wouldn't allow it for a moment, and, pushing him off by force, sat down in his place again. Then more men dropped down, one after the other, who, fetching 9 skeleton legs and 2 skulls, put them up, and played 9-pins with them. The youth thought he would like to play too, and said, "Look here, do you mind my joining the game?" "No." "Not if you have money." "I've money enough," he replied, "but your balls aren't round enough." Then he took the skulls, placed them on his lathe, and turned them till they were round. "Now they'll roar along better," said he, and hop-la! Now the fun begins. He played with them and lost some of his money, but when 12 struck everything vanished before his eyes. He lay down and slept peacefully. The next morning the king came, anxious for news. "How have you got on this time?" he asked. "I played 9-pins," he answered, "and lost a few pence." "Didn't you shudder then?" "No such luck," said he. "I made myself merry." Oh, if I only knew what it was to shudder! On the 3rd night he sat down again on his bench and said, in the most desponding way, "If I could only shudder!" When it got late, 6 big men came in carrying a coffin. Then he cried, "Ha! That's most likely my little cousin who only died a few days ago." And beckoning with his finger, he called out, "Come, my small cousin, come." They placed the coffin on the ground, and he approached it and took off the cover. In it lay a dead man. He felt his face, and it was cold as ice. "Wait," he said, "I'll heat you up a bit," went to the fire, warmed his hand, and laid it on the man's face, but the dead remained cold. Then he lifted him out, sat down at the fire, laid him on his knee, and rubbed his arms that the blood should circulate again. When that too had no effect, it occurred to him that if 2 people lay together in bed, they warmed each other. So he put him into the bed, covered him up, and lay down beside him. After a time the corpse became warm and began to move. Then the youth said, "Now, my little cousin, what would have happened if I hadn't warned you?" But the dead man rose up and cried out, "Now I will strangle you." "What?" said he. "Is that all the thanks I get? You should be put straight back into your coffin," lifted him up, threw him in, and closed the lid. Then the 6 men came and carried him out again. "I simply can't shudder," he said, "and it's clear I shan't learn it in a lifetime here." Then a man entered, of more than ordinary size and of a very fearful appearance, but he was old and had a white beard. "Oh, you miserable creature! Now you will soon know what it is to shudder," he cried, "for you must die." "Not so quickly," answered the youth. "If I am to die, you must catch me first." "I shall soon lay hold of you," spoke the monster. "Gently, gently, don't boast too much. I'm as strong as you, and stronger too." "We'll soon see," said the old man. "If you are stronger than I, then I'll let you off. Come, let's have a try." Then he led him through some dark passages to a forge, and grasping an axe, he drove one of the anvils with a blow into the earth. "I can do better than that," cried the youth, and went to the other anvil. The old man drew near him in order to watch closely, and his white beard hung right down. The youth seized the axe, cleft the anvil open, and jammed in the old man's beard. "Now I have you," said the youth. "This time it's your turn to die." Then he seized an iron rod and belaboured the old man till he, whimpering, begged him to leave off, and he would give him great riches. The youth drew out the axe and let him go. The old man led him back to the castle and showed him in a cellar 3 chests of gold. "One of these," said he, "belongs to the poor, 1 to the king, and the 3rd is yours." At that moment 12 struck, and the spirit vanished, leaving the youth alone in the dark. "I'll surely be able to find a way out," said he, and groping about, he at length found his way back to the room, and fell asleep at his fire. The next morning the king came and said, "Well, now you've surely learned to shudder?" "No," he answered. "What can it be? My dead cousin was here, and an old bearded man came who showed me heaps of money down below there. But what shuddering is, no one has told me." Then the king spoke. "You have freed the castle from its curse, and you shall marry my daughter." "That's all charming," he said, "but I still don't know what it is to shudder." Then the gold was brought up, and the wedding was celebrated. But the young king, though he loved his wife dearly, and though he was very happy, still kept on saying, "If I could only shudder! If I could only shudder!" At last he reduced her to despair. Then her maid said, "I'll help you. We'll soon make him shudder." So she went out to the stream that flowed through the garden, and had a pail full of little gudgeons brought to her. At night, when the young king was asleep, his wife had to pull the clothes off him, and pour the pail full of little gudgeons over him, so that the little fish swam all about him. Then he awoke and cried out, "Oh, how I shudder! How I shudder, dear wife! Yes, now I know what shuddering is." The terrible head. Once upon a time there was a king whose only child was a girl. Now the king had been very anxious to have a son, or at least a grandson, to come after him, but he was told by a prophet whom he consulted that his own daughter's son should kill him. This news terrified him so much that he determined never to let his daughter be married, for he thought it was better to have no grandson at all than to be killed by his grandson. He therefore called his workmen together and bade them dig a deep round hole in the earth, and then he had a prison of brass built in the hole, and then, when it was finished, he locked up his daughter. No man ever saw her, and she never saw even the fields and the sea, but only the sky and the sun, for there was a wide open window in the roof of the house of brass. So the princess would sit looking up at the sky and watching the clouds float across, and wondering whether she should ever get out of her prison. Now one day it seemed to her that the sky opened above her, and a great shower of shining gold fell through the window in the roof, and lay glittering in her room. Not very long after, the princess had a baby, a little boy. But when the king her father heard of it, he was very angry and afraid, for now the child was born that should be his death. Yet, cowardly as he was, he had not quite the heart to kill the princess and her baby outright, but he had them put in a huge brass-bound chest and thrust out to sea, that they might either be drowned or starved, or perhaps come to a country where they would be out of his way. So the princess and the baby floated and drifted in the chest on the sea all day and night. But the baby was not afraid of the waves nor of the wind, for he did not know that they could hurt him, and he slept quite soundly. And the princess sang a song over him, and this was her song: "Child, my child, how sound you sleep! Though your mother's care is deep, you can lie with heart at rest in the narrow brass-bound chest, in the starless night and drear. You can sleep and never hear billows breaking, and the cry of the night wind wandering by, in soft purple mantle sleeping, with your little face on mine, hearing not your mother weeping, and the breaking of the brine." Well, the daylight came at last, and the great chest was driven by the waves against the shore of an island. There the brass-bound chest lay, with the princess and her baby in it, till a man of that country came past, and saw it, and dragged it onto the beach. And when he had broken it open, behold, there was a beautiful lady and a little boy. So he took them home, and was very kind to them, and brought up the boy till he was a young man. Now when the boy had come to his full strength, the king of that country fell in love with his mother, and wanted to marry her. But he knew that she would never part from her boy. So he thought of a plan to get rid of the boy, and this was his plan. A great queen of a country not far off was going to be married, and this king said that all his subjects must bring him wedding presents to give her. And he made a feast to which he invited them all, and they all brought their presents. Some brought gold cups, and some brought necklaces of gold and amber, and some brought beautiful horses. But the boy had nothing, though he was the son of a princess, for his mother had nothing to give him. Then the rest of the company began to laugh at him, and the king said, "If you have nothing else to give, at least you might go and fetch the terrible head." The boy was proud, and spoke without thinking. "Then I swear that I will bring the terrible head, if it may be brought by a living man. But of what head you speak, I know not." Then they told him that somewhere, a long way off, there dwelt 3 dreadful sisters, monstrous ogrish women, with golden wings and claws of brass, and with serpents growing on their heads instead of hair. Now these women were so awful to look on, that whoever saw them was turned at once into stone. And 2 of them could not be put to death, but the youngest, whose face was very beautiful, could be killed. And it was hers head that the boy had promised to bring. You may imagine it was no easy adventure. When he heard all this, he was perhaps sorry that he had sworn to bring the terrible head, but he was determined to keep his oath. So he went out from the feast, where they all sat drinking and making merry, and he walked alone beside the sea in the dusk of the evening, at the place where the great chest, with himself and his mother in it, had been cast ashore. There he went and sat down on a rock, looking toward the sea, and wondering how he should begin to fulfill his vow. Then he felt someone touch him on the shoulder, and he turned and saw a young man like a king's son, having with him a tall and beautiful lady, whose blue eyes shone like stars. They were taller than mortal men, And the young man had a staff in his hand with golden wings on it, and 2 golden serpents twisted round it. And he had wings on his cap and on his shoes. He spoke to the boy and asked him why he was so unhappy. And the boy told him how he had sworn to bring the terrible head, and knew not how to begin to set about the adventure. Then the beautiful lady also spoke, and said that it was a foolish oath and a hasty, but it might be kept if a brave man had sworn it. Then the boy answered that he was not afraid, if only he knew the way. Then the lady said that to kill the dreadful woman with the golden wings and the brass claws, and to cut off her head, he needed 3 things. First, a cap of darkness, which would make him invisible when he wore it. Next, a sword of sharpness, which would cleave iron at one blow. And last, the shoes of swiftness, with which he might fly in the air. The boy answered that he knew not where such things were to be procured, and that, wanting them, he could only try and fail. Then the young man, taking off his own shoes, said, "First, you shall use these shoes till you have taken the terrible head, and then you must give them back to me. And with these shoes you will fly as fleet as a bird, or a thought, over the land or over the waves of the sea, wherever the shoes know the way. But there are ways which they do not know, roads beyond the borders of the world. And these roads have you to travel. Now first you must go to the 3 grey sisters who live far off in the north, and are so very cold that they have only 1 eye and 1 tooth among the 3. You must creep up close to them, and as one of them passes the eye to the other, you must seize it, and refuse to give it up till they have told you the way to the 3 fairies of the garden, and they will give you the cap of darkness and the sword of sharpness, and show you how to wing beyond this world to the land of the terrible head." Then the beautiful lady said, "Go forth at once, and do not return to say good-bye to your mother, for these things must be done quickly. And the shoes of swiftness themselves will carry you to the land of the 3 grey sisters, for they know the measure of that way." So the boy thanked her, and he fastened on the shoes of swiftness, and turned to say good-bye to the young man and the lady. But behold, they had vanished. He knew not how or where. Then he leaped in the air to try the shoes of swiftness, and they carried him more swiftly than the wind over the warm blue sea, over the happy lands of the south, over the northern peoples who drank mare's milk and lived in great wagons, wandering after their flocks, across the wide rivers where the wild fowl rose and fled before him, and over the plains and the cold North Sea he went, over the fields of snow and the hills of ice, to a place where the world ends, and all water is frozen, and there are no men, nor beasts, nor any green grass. There, in a blue cave of the ice, he found the 3 grey sisters, the oldest of living things. Their hair was as white as the snow, and their flesh of an icy blue, and they mumbled and nodded in a kind of dream, and their frozen breath hung round them like a cloud. Now the opening of the cave in the ice was narrow, and it was not easy to pass in without touching one of the grey sisters. But, floating on the shoes of swiftness, the boy just managed to steal in, and waited till one of the sisters said to another, who had their 1 eye, "Sister, what do you see? Do you see old times coming back?" "No, sister." "Then give me the eye, for perhaps I can see farther than you." Then the first sister passed the eye to the second, but as the second groped for it, the boy caught it cleverly out of her hand. "Where is the eye, sister?" said the second grey woman. "You have taken it yourself, sister," said the first grey woman. "Have you lost the eye, sister? Have you lost the eye?" said the third grey woman. "Shall we never find it again, and see old times coming back?" Then the boy slipped from behind them out of the cold cave into the air, and he laughed aloud. When the grey women heard that laugh, they began to weep, for now they knew that a stranger had robbed them, and that they could not help themselves, and their tears froze as they fell from the hollows where no eyes were, and rattled on the icy ground of the cave. Then they began to implore the boy to give them their eye back again, and he could not help being sorry for them. They were so pitiful. But he said he would never give them the eye till they told him the way to the fairies of the garden. Then they wrung their hands miserably, for they guessed why he had come, and how he was going to try to win the terrible head. Now the dreadful women were akin to the three grey sisters, and it was hard for them to tell the boy the way. But at last they told him to keep always south, and with the land on his left and the sea on his right, till he reached the island of the fairies of the garden. Then he gave them back the eye, and they began to look out once more for the old times coming back again. But the boy flew south between sea and land, keeping the land always on his left hand, till he saw a beautiful island crowned with flowering trees. There he alighted, and there he found the three fairies of the garden. They were like three very beautiful young women, dressed one in green, one in white, and one in red, and they were dancing and singing round an apple tree with apples of gold. And this was their song, the song of the western fairies, round and round the apples of gold. Round and round dance we, thus do we dance from the days of old about the enchanted tree. Round and round and round we go, while the spring is green, or the stream shall flow, or the wind shall stir the sea. There is none may taste of the golden fruit, till the golden new time come. Many a tree shall spring from shoot, many a blossom be withered at root, many a song be dumb. Broken and still shall be many a lute, or ever the new times come. Round and round the tree of gold, round and round dance we, so doth the great world spin from of old, summer and winter, and fire and cold, song that is sung, and tale that is told, even as we dance, that fold and unfold round the stem of the fairy tree. These grave dancing fairies were very unlike the grey women, and they were glad to see the boy, and treated him kindly. Then they asked him why he had come, and he told them how he was sent to find the sword of sharpness and the cap of darkness. And the fairies gave him these, and a wallet, and a shield, and belted the sword, which had a diamond blade, round his waist, and the cap they set on his head, and told him that now even they could not see him, though they were fairies. Then he took it off, and they each kissed him and wished him good fortune. And then they began again their eternal dance round the golden tree, for it is their business to guard it till the new times come, or till the world's ending. So the boy put the cap on his head, and hung the wallet round his waist, and the shining shield on his shoulders, and flew beyond the great river that lies coiled like a serpent round the whole world. And by the banks of that river, there he found the three terrible women, all asleep beneath a poplar tree, and the dead poplar leaves lay all about them. Their golden wings were folded, and their brass claws were crossed, and two of them slept with their hideous heads beneath their wings like birds, and the serpents in their hair writhed out from under the feathers of gold. But the youngest slept between her two sisters, and she lay on her back, with her beautiful sad face turned to the sky, and though she slept, her eyes were wide open. If the boy had seen her, he would have been changed into stone by the terror and the pity of it. She was so awful. But he had thought of a plan for killing her without looking on her face. As soon as he caught sight of the three from far off, he took his shining shield from his shoulders and held it up like a mirror, so that he saw the dreadful women reflected in it, and did not see the terrible head itself. Then he came nearer and nearer, till he reckoned that he was within a sword stroke of the youngest, and he guessed where he should strike a back blow behind him. Then he drew the sword of sharpness and struck once, and the terrible head was cut from the shoulders of the creature, and the blood leaped out and struck him like a blow. But he thrust the terrible head into his wallet and flew away without looking behind. Then the two dreadful sisters who were left wakened and rose in the air like great birds, and though they could not see him because of his cap of darkness, they flew after him up the wind, following by the scent through the clouds, like hounds hunting in a wood. They came so close that he could hear the clatter of their golden wings, and their shrieks to each other, "Here, here!" No, there, this way he went, as they chased him. But the shoes of swiftness flew too fast for them, and at last their cries and the rattle of their wings died away as he crossed the great river that runs round the world. Now, when the horrible creatures were far in the distance, and the boy found himself on the right side of the river, he flew straight eastward, trying to seek his own country. But as he looked down from the air, he saw a very strange sight. A beautiful girl chained to a stake at the high water mark of the sea. The girl was so frightened or so tired that she was only prevented from falling by the iron chain about her waist, and there she hung, as if she were dead. The boy was very sorry for her, and flew down and stood beside her. When he spoke, she raised her head and looked round, but his voice only seemed to frighten her. Then he remembered that he was wearing the cap of darkness, and that she could only hear him, not see him. So he took it off, and there he stood before her, the handsomest young man she had ever seen in all her life, with short curly yellow hair and blue eyes and a laughing face. And he thought her the most beautiful girl in the world. So first, with one blow of the sword of sharpness, he cut the iron chain that bound her, and then he asked her what she did there, and why men treated her so cruelly. And she told him that she was the daughter of the king of that country, and that she was tied there to be eaten by a monstrous beast out of the sea, for the beast came and devoured a girl every day. Now the lot had fallen on her, and as she was just saying this, a long, fierce head of a cruel sea creature rose out of the waves and snapped at the girl. But the beast had been too greedy and too hurried, so he missed his aim the first time. Before he could rise and bite again, the boy had whipped the terrible head out of his wallet and held it up. And when the sea beast leaped out once more, its eyes fell on the head, and instantly it was turned into a stone. And the stone beast is there on the sea-coast to this day. Then the boy and the girl went to the palace of the king, her father, where everyone was weeping for her death, and they could hardly believe their eyes when they saw her come back well. And the king and queen made much of the boy, and could not contain themselves for delight when they found he wanted to marry their daughter. So the two were married with the most splendid rejoicings, and when they had passed some time at court, they went home in a ship to the boy's own country, for he could not carry his bride through the air. So he took the shoes of swiftness, and the cap of darkness, and the sword of sharpness up to a lonely place in the hills. There he left them, and there they were found by the man and woman who had met him at home beside the sea, and had helped him to start on his journey. When this had been done, the boy and his bride set forth for home, and landed at the harbour of his native land. But whom should he meet in the very street of the town but his own mother, flying for her life from the wicked king, who now wished to kill her, because he found that she would never marry him. For if she had liked the king ill before, she liked him far worse now that he had caused her son to disappear so suddenly. She did not know, of course, where the boy had gone, but thought the king had slain him secretly. So now she was running for her very life, and the wicked king was following her with a sword in his hand. Then, behold, she ran into her son's very arms, but he had only time to kiss her and step in front of her, when the king struck at him with his sword. The boy caught the blow on his shield and cried to the king, "I swore to bring you the terrible head, and see how I keep my oath." Then he drew forth the head from his wallet, and when the king's eyes fell on it, instantly he was turned into stone, just as he stood there with his sword lifted. Now all the people rejoiced, because the wicked king should rule them no longer. And they asked the boy to be their king, but he said no. He must take his mother home to her father's house. So the people chose for king the man who had been kind to his mother when first she was cast on the island in the great chest. Presently the boy and his mother and his wife set sail for his mother's own country, from which she had been driven so unkindly. But on the way they stayed at the court of a king, and it happened that he was holding games, and giving prizes to the best runners, boxers, and quoit throwers. Then the boy would try his strength with the rest, but he threw the quoit so far that it went beyond what had ever been thrown before, and fell in the crowd, striking a man so that he died. Now this man was no other than the father of the boy's mother, who had fled away from his own kingdom for fear his grandson should find him and kill him after all. Thus he was destroyed by his own cowardice and by chance, and thus the prophecy was fulfilled. But the boy and his wife and his mother went back to the kingdom that was theirs, and lived long and happily after all their troubles. The Water Lily. The Gold Spinners. Once upon a time, in a large forest, there lived an old woman and 3 maidens. They were all 3 beautiful, but the youngest was the fairest. Their hut was quite hidden by trees, and none saw their beauty but the sun by day, and the moon by night, and the eyes of the stars. The old woman kept the girls hard at work from morning till night, spinning gold flax into yarn, and when one distaff was empty, another was given them. So they had no rest. The thread had to be fine and even, and when done, was locked up in a secret chamber by the old woman, who twice or thrice every summer went a journey. Before she went, she gave out work for each day of her absence, and always returned in the night, so that the girls never saw what she brought back with her, neither would she tell them whence the gold flax came, nor what it was to be used for. Now, when the time came round for the old woman to set out on one of these journeys, she gave each maiden work for 6 days, with the usual warning, "Children, don't let your eyes wander, and on no account speak to a man, for if you do, your thread will lose its brightness, and misfortunes of all kinds will follow." They laughed at this oft-repeated caution, saying to each other, "How can our gold thread lose its brightness, and have we any chance of speaking to a man?" On the 3rd day after the old woman's departure, a young prince, hunting in the forest, got separated from his companions and completely lost. Weary of seeking his way, he flung himself down under a tree, leaving his horse to browse at will, and fell asleep. The sun had set when he awoke and began once more to try and find his way out of the forest. At last he perceived a narrow footpath, which he eagerly followed, and found that it led him to a small hut. The maidens, who were sitting at the door of their hut for coolness, saw him approaching, and the 2 elder were much alarmed, for they remembered the old woman's warning. But the youngest said, "Never before have I seen anyone like him. Let me have one look." They entreated her to come in, but seeing that she would not, left her. And the prince, coming up, courteously greeted the maiden, and told her he had lost his way in the forest and was both hungry and weary. She set food before him, and was so delighted with his conversation that she forgot the old woman's caution and lingered for hours. In the meantime, the prince's companions sought him far and wide, but to no purpose, so they sent 2 messengers to tell the sad news to the king, who immediately ordered a regiment of cavalry and 1 of infantry to go and look for him. After 3 days' search, they found the hut. The prince was still sitting by the door, and had been so happy in the maiden's company that the time had seemed like a single hour. Before leaving, he promised to return and fetch her to his father's court, where he would make her his bride. When he had gone, she sat down to her wheel to make up for lost time, but was dismayed to find that her thread had lost all its brightness. Her heart beat fast, and she wept bitterly, for she remembered the old woman's warning, and knew not what misfortune might now befall her. The old woman returned in the night, and knew by the tarnished thread what had happened in her absence. She was furiously angry, and told the maiden that she had brought down misery both on herself and on the prince. The maiden could not rest for thinking of this. At last she could bear it no longer, and resolved to seek help from the prince. As a child, she had learned to understand the speech of birds, and this was now of great use to her, for, seeing a raven pluming itself on a pine bough, she cried softly to it, "Dear bird, cleverest of all birds, as well as swiftest on wing, wilt thou help me?" "How can I help thee?" asked the raven. She answered, "Fly away, until thou comest to a splendid town, where stands a king's palace. Seek out the king's son, and tell him that a great misfortune has befallen me." Then she told the raven how her thread had lost its brightness, how terribly angry the old woman was, and how she feared some great disaster. The raven promised faithfully to do her bidding, and, spreading its wings, flew away. The maiden now went home, and worked hard all day at winding up the yarn her elder sisters had spun, for the old woman would let her spin no longer. Toward evening she heard the raven's "Kra, kra" from the pine tree, and eagerly hastened thither to hear the answer. By great good fortune the raven had found a wind wizard's son in the palace garden, who understood the speech of birds, and to him he had entrusted the message. When the prince heard it, he was very sorrowful, and took counsel with his friends how to free the maiden. Then he said to the wind wizard's son, "Beg the raven to fly quickly back to the maiden, and tell her to be ready on the 9th night, for then will I come and fetch her away." The wind wizard's son did this, and the raven flew so swiftly that it reached the hut that same evening. The maiden thanked the bird heartily and went home, telling no one what she had heard. As the 9th night drew near, she became very unhappy, for she feared lest some terrible mischance should arise and ruin all. On this night she crept quietly out of the house and waited trembling at some little distance from the hut. Presently she heard the muffled tramp of horses, and soon the armed troop appeared, led by the prince, who had prudently marked all the trees beforehand in order to know the way. When he saw the maiden, he sprang from his horse, lifted her into the saddle, and then, mounting behind, rode homeward. The moon shone so brightly that they had no difficulty in seeing the marked trees. By and by, the coming of dawn loosened the tongues of all the birds, and, had the prince only known what they were saying, or the maiden been listening, they might have been spared much sorrow, but they were thinking only of each other. And when they came out of the forest, the sun was high in the heavens. Next morning, when the youngest girl did not come to her work, the old woman asked where she was. The sisters pretended not to know, but the old woman easily guessed what had happened, and, as she was in reality a wicked witch, determined to punish the fugitives. Accordingly, she collected 9 different kinds of enchanter's nightshade, added some salt, which she first bewitched, and, doing all up in a cloth into the shape of a fluffy ball, sent it after them on the wings of the wind, saying, "Whirlwind, mother of the wind, lend thy aid against her who sinned. Carry with thee this magic ball, cast her from his arms for ever, bury her in the rippling river." At midday, the prince and his men came to a deep river, spanned by so narrow a bridge that only one rider could cross at a time. The horse on which the prince and the maiden were riding had just reached the middle when the magic ball flew by. The horse, in its fright, suddenly reared, and before anyone could stop it, flung the maiden into the swift current below. The prince tried to jump in after her, but his men held him back, and in spite of his struggles led him home, where for 6 weeks he shut himself up in a secret chamber, and would neither eat nor drink, so great was his grief. At last he became so ill his life was despaired of, and in great alarm the king caused all the wizards of his country to be summoned. But none could cure him. At last the Wind Wizard's son said to the king, "Send for the old wizard from Finland. He knows more than all the wizards of your kingdom put together." A messenger was at once sent to Finland, and a week later the old wizard himself arrived on the wings of the wind. "Honored king," said the wizard, "the wind has blown this illness upon your son, and a magic ball has snatched away his beloved. This it is which makes him grieve so constantly. Let the wind blow upon him, that it may blow away his sorrow." Then the king made his son go out into the wind, and he gradually recovered and told his father all. "Forget the maiden," said the king, "and take another bride." But the prince said he could never love another. A year afterward he came suddenly upon the bridge where his beloved met her death. As he recalled the misfortune, he wept bitterly, and would have given all he possessed to have her once more alive. In the midst of his grief he thought he heard a voice singing, and looked round, but could see no one. Then he heard the voice again, and it said, "Alas! Bewitched and all forsaken, 'tis I must lie for ever here. My beloved no thought has taken to free his bride that was so dear." He was greatly astonished, sprang from his horse, and looked everywhere to see if no one were hidden under the bridge, but no one was there. Then he noticed a yellow water lily floating on the surface of the water, half hidden by its broad leaves, but flowers do not sing, and in great surprise he waited, hoping to hear more. Then again the voice sang, "Alas! Bewitched and all forsaken, 'tis I must lie for ever here. My beloved no thought has taken to free his bride that was so dear." The prince suddenly remembered the gold spinners, and said to himself, "If I ride thither, who knows but that they could explain this to me?" He at once rode to the hut, and found the 2 maidens at the fountain. He told them what had befallen their sister the year before, and how he had twice heard a strange song, but yet could see no singer. They said that the yellow water lily could be none other than their sister, who was not dead, but transformed by the magic ball. Before he went to bed, the eldest made a cake of magic herbs, which she gave him to eat. In the night he dreamed that he was living in the forest and could understand all that the birds said to each other. Next morning he told this to the maidens, and they said that the charmed cake had caused it, and advised him to listen well to the birds and see what they could tell him. And when he had recovered his bride, they begged him to return and deliver them from their wretched bondage. Having promised this, he joyfully returned home, and as he was riding through the forest, he could perfectly understand all that the birds said. He heard a thrush say to a magpie, "How stupid men are! They cannot understand the simplest thing. It is now quite a year since the maiden was transformed into a water lily, and though she sings so sadly that anyone going over the bridge must hear her, yet no one comes to her aid. Her former bridegroom rode over it a few days ago and heard her singing, but was no wiser than the rest. And he is to blame for all her misfortunes," added the magpie. "If he heeds only the words of men, she will remain a flower forever." She was soon delivered, were the matter only laid before the old wizard of Finland. After hearing this, the prince wondered how he could get a message conveyed to Finland. He heard one swallow say to another, "Come, let us fly to Finland. We can build better nests there." "Stop, kind friends," cried the prince. "Will you do something for me?" The birds consented, and he said, "Take 1,000 greetings from me to the Wizard of Finland, and ask him how I may restore a maiden transformed into a flower to her own form." The swallows flew away, and the prince rode on to the bridge. There he waited, hoping to hear the song, but he heard nothing but the rushing of the water and the moaning of the wind, and, disappointed, rode home. Shortly after, he was sitting in the garden, thinking that the swallows must have forgotten his message, when he saw an eagle flying above him. The bird gradually descended until it perched on a tree close to the prince and said, "The Wizard of Finland greets thee and bids me say that thou mayest free the maiden. Thus, go to the river and smear thyself all over with mud, then say, 'From a man into a crab, and thou wilt become a crab. Plunge boldly into the water. Swim as close as thou canst to the water lily's roots, and loosen them from the mud and reeds. This done, fasten thy claws into the roots and rise with them to the surface. Let the water flow all over the flower, and drift with the current until thou comest to a mountain ash tree on the left bank. There is near it a large stone. Stop there and say, 'From a crab into a man, from a water lily into a maiden, and ye both will be restored to your own forms.'" Full of doubt and fear, the prince let some time pass before he was bold enough to attempt to rescue the maiden. Then a crow said to him, "Why dost thou hesitate? The old wizard has not told thee wrong, neither have the birds deceived thee. Hasten and dry the maiden's tears." "Nothing worse than death can befall me," thought the prince, "and death is better than endless sorrow." And death is better than endless sorrow. So he mounted his horse and went to the bridge. Again he heard the water lilies lament, and, hesitating no longer, smeared himself all over with mud, and, saying, "From a man into a crab," plunged into the river. For one moment the water hissed in his ears, and then all was silent. He swam up to the plant and began to loosen its roots, but so firmly were they fixed in the mud and reeds that this took him a long time. He then grasped them and rose to the surface, letting the water flow over the flower. The current carried them down the stream, but nowhere could he see the mountain ash. At last he saw it, and close by the large stone. Here he stopped and said, "From a crab into a man, from a water lily into a maiden," and, to his delight, found himself once more a prince, and the maiden was by his side. She was 10 times more beautiful than before, and wore a magnificent pale yellow robe, sparkling with jewels. She thanked him for having freed her from the cruel witch's power, and willingly consented to marry him. But when they came to the bridge where he had left his horse, it was nowhere to be seen, for, though the prince thought he had been a crab only a few hours, he had in reality been under the water for more than 10 days. While they were wondering how they should reach his father's court, they saw a splendid coach driven by 6 gaily caparisoned horses coming along the bank. In this they drove to the palace. The king and queen were at church weeping for their son, whom they had long mourned for dead. Great was their delight and astonishment when the prince entered, leading the beautiful maiden by the hand. The wedding was at once celebrated, and there was feasting and merrymaking throughout the kingdom for 6 weeks. Some time afterward, the prince and his bride were sitting in the garden, when a crow said to them, "Ungrateful creatures! Have you forgotten the 2 poor maidens who helped you in your distress? Must they spin gold flax forever? Have no pity on the old witch. The three maidens are princesses, whom she stole away when they were children together, with all the silver utensils which she turned into gold flax. Poison were her fittest punishment. The prince was ashamed of having forgotten his promise, and set out at once, and by great good fortune reached the hut when the old woman was away. The maidens had dreamed that he was coming, and were ready to go with him. But first they made a cake in which they put poison and left it on a table where the old woman was likely to see it when she returned. She did see it, and thought it looked so tempting that she greedily ate it up and at once died. In the secret chamber were found 50 wagon loads of gold flax, and as much more was discovered buried. The hut was razed to the ground, and the prince and his bride and her 2 sisters lived happily ever after. The White Cat. Once upon a time there was a king who had 3 sons, who were all so clever and brave that he began to be afraid that they would want to reign over the kingdom before he was dead. Now the king, though he felt that he was growing old, did not at all wish to give up the government of his kingdom while he could still manage it very well. So he thought the best way to live in peace would be to divert the minds of his sons by promises which he could always get out of when the time came for keeping them. So he sent for them all, and after speaking to them kindly, he added, "You will quite agree with me, my dear children, that my great age makes it impossible for me to look after my affairs of state as carefully as I once did. I begin to fear that this may affect the welfare of my subjects. Therefore, I wish that one of you should succeed to my crown. But in return for such a gift as this, it is only right that you should do something for me. Now, as I think of retiring into the country, it seems to me that a pretty, lively, faithful little dog would be very good company for me. So, without any regard for your ages, I promise that the one who brings me the most beautiful little dog shall succeed me at once." The 3 princes were greatly surprised by their father's sudden fancy for a little dog. But as it gave the 2 younger ones a chance they would not otherwise have had of being king, and as the eldest was too polite to make any objection, they accepted the commission with pleasure. They bade farewell to the king, who gave them presents of silver and precious stones, and appointed to meet them at the same hour, in the same place, after a year had passed, to see the little dogs they had brought for him. Then they went together to a castle, which was about a league from the city, accompanied by all their particular friends, to whom they gave a grand banquet. And the 3 brothers promised to be friends always, to share whatever good fortune befell them, and not to be parted by any envy or jealousy. And so they set out, agreeing to meet at the same castle at the appointed time, to present themselves before the king together. Each one took a different road, and the 2 eldest met with many adventures. But it is about the youngest that you are going to hear. He was young and gay and handsome, and knew everything that a prince ought to know. And as for his courage, there was simply no end to it. Hardly a day passed without his buying several dogs, big and little, greyhounds, mastiffs, spaniels, and lapdogs. As soon as he had bought a pretty one, he was sure to see a still prettier, and then he had to get rid of all the others and buy that one, as, being alone, he found it impossible to take 30 or 40,000 dogs about with him. He journeyed from day to day, not knowing where he was going, until at last, just at nightfall, he reached a great gloomy forest. He did not know his way, and, to make matters worse, it began to thunder, and the rain poured down. He took the first path he could find, and after walking for a long time, he fancied he saw a faint light, and began to hope that he was coming to some cottage where he might find shelter for the night. At length, guided by the light, he reached the door of the most splendid castle he could have imagined. This door was of gold, covered with carbuncles, and it was the pure red light which shone from them that had shown him the way through the forest. The walls were of the finest porcelain in all the most delicate colours, and the prince saw that all the stories he had ever read were pictured upon them. But as he was terribly wet, and the rain still fell in torrents, he could not stay to look about any more, but came back to the golden door. There he saw a deer's foot hanging by a chain of diamonds, and he began to wonder who could live in this magnificent castle. "They must feel very secure against robbers," he said to himself. "What is to hinder anyone from cutting off that chain and digging out those carbuncles and making himself rich for life?" He pulled the deer's foot, and immediately a silver bell sounded and the door flew open. But the prince could see nothing but numbers of hands in the air, each holding a torch. He was so much surprised that he stood quite still until he felt himself pushed forward by other hands, so that, though he was somewhat uneasy, he could not help going on. With his hand on his sword, to be prepared for whatever might happen, he entered a hall paved with lapis lazuli, while two lovely voices sang, "The hands you see floating above will swiftly your bidding obey. If your heart dreads not conquering love, in this place you may fearlessly stay." The prince could not believe that any danger threatened him when he was welcomed in this way, so, guided by the mysterious hands, he went toward a door of coral, which opened of its own accord, and he found himself in a vast hall of mother-of-pearl, out of which opened a number of other rooms, glittering with thousands of lights, and full of such beautiful pictures and precious things that the prince felt quite bewildered. After passing through 60 rooms, the hands that conducted him stopped, and the prince saw a most comfortable-looking armchair drawn up close to the chimney corner. At the same moment the fire lighted itself, and the pretty, soft, clever hands took off the prince's wet, muddy clothes and presented him with fresh ones made of the richest stuffs, all embroidered with gold and emeralds. He could not help admiring everything he saw, and the deft way in which the hands waited on him, though they sometimes appeared so suddenly that they made him jump when he was quite ready. And I can assure you that he looked very different from the wet and weary prince who had stood outside in the rain and pulled the deer's foot. The hands led him to a splendid room, upon the walls of which were painted the histories of Puss in Boots and a number of other famous cats. The table was laid for supper with 2 golden plates and golden spoons and forks, and the sideboard was covered with dishes and glasses of crystal set with precious stones. The prince was wondering who the second place could be for, when suddenly in came about a dozen cats carrying guitars and rolls of music, who took their places at one end of the room, and under the direction of a cat who beat time with a roll of paper, began to mew in every imaginable key, and to draw their claws across the strings of the guitars, making the strangest kind of music that could be heard. The prince hastily stopped up his ears, but even then the sight of these comical musicians sent him into fits of laughter. "What funny thing shall I see next?" he said to himself, and instantly the door opened, and in came a tiny figure covered by a long black veil. It was conducted by 2 cats wearing black mantles and carrying swords, and a large party of cats followed, who brought in cages full of rats and mice. The prince was so much astonished that he thought he must be dreaming, but the little figure came up to him and threw back its veil, and he saw that it was the loveliest little white cat it is possible to imagine. She looked very young and very sad, and in a sweet little voice that went straight to his heart, she said to the prince, "King's son, you are welcome. The Queen of the Cats is glad to see you." "Lady Cat," replied the prince. "I thank you for receiving me so kindly, but surely you are no ordinary pussy-cat?" "Indeed, the way you speak and the magnificence of your castle prove it plainly." "King's son," said the white cat, "I beg you to spare me these compliments, for I am not used to them. But now," she added, "let supper be served, and let the musicians be silent, as the prince does not understand what they are saying." So the mysterious hands began to bring in the supper, and first they put on the table 2 dishes, one containing stewed pigeons, and the other a fricassee of fat mice. The sight of the latter made the prince feel as if he could not enjoy his supper at all, but the white cat, seeing this, assured him that the dishes intended for him were prepared in a separate kitchen, and he might be quite certain that they contained neither rats nor mice. And the prince felt so sure that she would not deceive him that he had no more hesitation in beginning. Presently he noticed that on the little paw that was next him the white cat wore a bracelet containing a portrait, and he begged to be allowed to look at it. To his great surprise, he found it represented an extremely handsome young man who was so like himself that it might have been his own portrait. The white cat sighed as he looked at it, and seemed sadder than ever, and the prince dared not ask any questions for fear of displeasing her. So he began to talk about other things, and found that she was interested in all the subjects he cared for himself, and seemed to know quite well what was going on in the world. After supper, they went into another room, which was fitted up as a theatre, and the cats acted and danced for their amusement, and then the white cat said good night to him, and the hands conducted him into a room he had not seen before. Hung with tapestry worked with butterflies' wings of every colour, there were mirrors that reached from the ceiling to the floor, and a little white bed with curtains of gauze tied up with ribbons. The prince went to bed in silence, as he did not quite know how to begin a conversation with the hands that waited on him, and in the morning he was awakened by a noise and confusion outside of his window, and the hands came and quickly dressed him in hunting costume. When he looked out, all the cats were assembled in the courtyard, some leading greyhounds, some blowing horns, for the white cat was going out hunting. The hands led a wooden horse up to the prince, and seemed to expect him to mount it, at which he was very indignant, but it was no use for him to object, for he speedily found himself upon its back, and it pranced gaily off with him. The white cat herself was riding a monkey, which climbed even up to the eagles' nests when she had a fancy for the young eaglets. Never was there a pleasanter hunting party, and when they returned to the castle, the prince and the white cat supped together as before. But when they had finished, she offered him a crystal goblet, which must have contained a magic draught, for as soon as he had swallowed its contents, he forgot everything, even the little dog that he was seeking for the king, and only thought how happy he was to be with the white cat. And so the days passed, in every kind of amusement, until the year was nearly gone. The prince had forgotten all about meeting his brothers. He did not even know what country he belonged to, but the white cat knew when he ought to go back. And one day she said to him, "Do you know that you have only 3 days left to look for the little dog for your father? And your brothers have found lovely ones?" Then the prince suddenly recovered his memory and cried, "What can have made me forget such an important thing? My whole fortune depends upon it, and even if I could in such a short time find a dog pretty enough to gain me a kingdom, where should I find a horse who would carry me all that way in 3 days?" And he began to be very vexed. But the white cat said to him, "King's son, do not trouble yourself. I am your friend, and will make everything easy for you. You can still stay here for a day, as the good wooden horse can take you to your country in 12 hours. "I thank you, beautiful cat," said the prince, "but what good will it do me to get back if I have not a dog to take to my father?" "See here," answered the white cat, holding up an acorn. there is a prettier one in this than in the dog star." "Oh, White Cat, dear," said the prince, "how unkind you are to laugh at me now. Only listen," she said, holding the acorn to his ear. And inside it he distinctly heard a tiny voice say, "Bow! Wow!" The prince was delighted, for a dog that can be shut up in an acorn must be very small indeed. He wanted to take it out and look at it, but the White Cat said it would be better not to open the acorn till he was before the king, in case the tiny dog should be cold on the journey. He thanked her 1,000 times, and said goodbye quite sadly when the time came for him to set out. "The days have passed so quickly with you," he said. "I only wish I could take you with me now." But the White Cat shook her head and sighed deeply in answer. After all, the prince was the first to arrive at the castle where he had agreed to meet his brothers, but they came soon after, and stared in amazement when they saw the wooden horse in the courtyard jumping like a hunter. The prince met them joyfully, and they began to tell him all their adventures, but he managed to hide from them what he had been doing, and even led them to think that a turnspit dog which he had with him was the one he was bringing for the king. Fond as they all were of one another, the two eldest could not help being glad to think that their dogs certainly had a better chance. The next morning they started in the same chariot. The elder brothers carried in baskets 2 such tiny, fragile dogs that they hardly dared to touch them. As for the turnspit, he ran after the chariot and got so covered with mud that one could hardly see what he was like at all. When they reached the palace, everyone crowded round to welcome them as they went into the king's great hall. And when the 2 brothers presented their little dogs, nobody could decide which was the prettier. They were already arranging between themselves to share the kingdom equally when the youngest stepped forward, drawing from his pocket the acorn the White Cat had given him. He opened it quickly, and there, upon a white cushion, they saw a dog so small that it could easily have been put through a ring. The prince laid it upon the ground, and it got up at once and began to dance. The king did not know what to say, for it was impossible that anything could be prettier than this little creature. Nevertheless, as he was in no hurry to part with his crown, he told his sons that, as they had been so successful the first time, he would ask them to go once again and seek by land and sea for a piece of muslin so fine that it could be drawn through the eye of a needle. The brothers were not very willing to set out again, but the 2 eldest consented because it gave them another chance, and they started as before. The youngest again mounted the wooden horse and rode back at full speed to his beloved White Cat. Every door of the castle stood wide open, and every window and turret was illuminated, so it looked more wonderful than before. The hands hastened to meet him, and led the wooden horse off to the stable, while he hurried in to find the White Cat. She was asleep in a little basket on a white satin cushion, but she very soon started up when she heard the prince, and was overjoyed at seeing him once more. "How could I hope that you would come back to me, king's son?" she said. And then he stroked and petted her, and told her of his successful journey, and how he had come back to ask her help, as he believed that it was impossible to find what the king demanded. The White Cat looked serious, and said she must think what was to be done, but that, luckily, there were some cats in the castle who could spin very well, and if anybody could manage it, they could, and she would set them the task herself. And then the hands appeared, carrying torches, and conducted the prince and the White Cat to a long gallery which overlooked a river, from the windows of which they saw a magnificent display of fireworks of all sorts, after which they had supper, which the prince liked even better than the fireworks, for it was very late, and he was hungry after his long ride. And so the days passed quickly as before. It was impossible to feel dull with the White Cat, and she had quite a talent for inventing new amusements. Indeed, She was cleverer than a cat has any right to be. But when the prince asked her how it was that she was so wise, she only said, "King's son, do not ask me. Guess what you please. I may not tell you anything." The prince was so happy that he did not trouble himself at all about the time. But presently the white cat told him that the year was gone, and that he need not be at all anxious about the piece of muslin, as they had made it very well. "This time," she added, "I can give you a suitable escort." And on looking out into the courtyard, the prince saw a superb chariot of burnished gold, enamelled in flame colour with 1,000 different devices. It was drawn by 12 snow-white horses, harnessed 4 abreast. Their trappings were flame-coloured velvet embroidered with diamonds. 100 chariots followed, each drawn by 8 horses and filled with officers in splendid uniforms, and 1,000 guards surrounded the procession. "Go!" said the white cat, "and when you appear before the king in such state, he surely will not refuse you the crown which you deserve. Take this walnut, but do not open it until you are before him. Then you will find in it the piece of stuff you ask me for." "Lovely Blanchette," said the prince, "how can I thank you properly for all your kindness to me? Only tell me that you wish it, and I will give up forever all thought of being king, and will stay here with you always." "King's son," she replied, "it shows the goodness of your heart that you should care so much for a little white cat, who is good for nothing but to catch mice, but you must not stay." So the prince kissed her little paw and set out. You can imagine how fast he travelled when I tell you that they reached the king's palace in just half the time it had taken the wooden horse to get there. This time the prince was so late that he did not try to meet his brothers at their castle, so they thought he could not be coming, and were rather glad of it, and displayed their pieces of muslin to the king proudly, feeling sure of success. And indeed the stuff was very fine, and would go through the eye of a very large needle. But the king, who was only too glad to make a difficulty, sent for a particular needle, which was kept among the crown jewels, and had such a small eye that everybody saw at once that it was impossible that the muslin should pass through it. The princes were angry, and were beginning to complain that it was a trick, when suddenly the trumpet sounded, and the youngest prince came in. His father and brothers were quite astonished at his magnificence, and after he had greeted them, he took the walnut from his pocket and opened it, fully expecting to find the piece of muslin, but instead there was only a hazelnut. He cracked it, and there lay a cherry stone. Everybody was looking on, and the king was chuckling to himself at the idea of finding the piece of muslin in a nutshell. However, the prince cracked the cherry stone, but everyone laughed when he saw it contained only its own kernel. He opened that and found a grain of wheat, and in that was a millet seed. Then he himself began to wonder, and muttered softly, white cat, are you making fun of me?" In an instant he felt a cat's claw give his hand quite a sharp scratch, and hoping that it was meant as an encouragement, he opened the millet seed and drew out of it a piece of muslin 400 ells long, woven with the loveliest colours and most wonderful patterns. And when the needle was brought, it went through the eye 6 times with the greatest ease. The king turned pale, and the other princes stood silent and sorrowful, for nobody could deny that this was the most marvellous piece of muslin that was to be found in the world. Presently the king turned to his sons and said, with a deep sigh, "Nothing could console me more in my old age than to realize your willingness to gratify my wishes. Go then once more, and whoever at the end of a year can bring back the loveliest princess shall be married to her, and shall, without further delay, receive the crown, for my successor must certainly be married." The prince considered that he had earned the kingdom fairly twice over. But still, he was too well bred to argue about it, so he just went back to his gorgeous chariot and, surrounded by his escort, returned to the White Cat faster than he had come. This time she was expecting him. The path was strewn with flowers, and 1,000 braziers were burning scented woods which perfumed the air. Seated in a gallery from which she could see his arrival, the White Cat waited for him. "Well, king's son," she said, "here you are once more without a crown." "Madam," said he, "thanks to your generosity I have earned one twice over. But the fact is that my father is so loth to part with it that it would be no pleasure to me to take it." "Never mind," she answered. "It's just as well to try and deserve it. As you must take back a lovely princess with you next time, I will be on the lookout for one for you. In the meantime, let us enjoy ourselves. Tonight I have ordered a battle between my cats and the river rats on purpose to amuse you." So this year slipped away even more pleasantly than the preceding ones. Sometimes the prince could not help asking the White Cat how it was she could talk. "Perhaps you are a fairy," he said, "or has some enchanter changed you into a cat?" But she only gave him answers that told him nothing. Days go by so quickly when one is very happy that it is certain the prince would never have thought of its being time to go back. When one evening as they sat together, the White Cat said to him that if he wanted to take a lovely princess home with him the next day, he must be prepared to do what she told him. "Take this sword," she said, "and cut off my head." "Aye," cried the prince, "I cut off your head." "Blanchette, darling, how could I do it?" "I entreat you to do as I tell you, king's son," she replied. The tears came into the prince's eyes as he begged her to ask him anything but that, to set him any task she pleased as a proof of his devotion, but to spare him the grief of killing his dear pussy. But nothing he could say altered her determination, and at last he drew his sword, and desperately, with a trembling hand, cut off the little white head. But imagine his astonishment and delight when suddenly a lovely princess stood before him, and, while he was still speechless with amazement, the door opened and a goodly company of knights and ladies entered, each carrying a cat's skin. They hastened with every sign of joy to the princess, kissing her hand and congratulating her on being once more restored to her natural shape. She received them graciously, but after a few minutes begged that they would leave her alone with the prince, to whom she said, "You see, prince, that you were right in supposing me to be no ordinary cat. My father reigned over 6 kingdoms. The queen, my mother, whom he loved dearly, had a passion for travelling and exploring, and when I was only a few weeks old, she obtained his permission to visit a certain mountain, of which she had heard many marvellous tales, and set out, taking with her a number of her attendants. On the way they had to pass near an old castle belonging to the fairies. Nobody had ever been into it, but it was reported to be full of the most wonderful things, and my mother remembered to have heard that the fairies had in their garden such fruits as were to be seen and tasted nowhere else. She began to wish to try them for herself, and turned her steps in the direction of the garden. On arriving at the door, which blazed with gold and jewels, she ordered her servants to knock loudly, but it was useless. It seemed as if all the inhabitants of the castle must be asleep or dead. Now the more difficult it became to obtain the fruit, the more the queen was determined that have it she would. So she ordered that they should bring ladders, and get over the wall into the garden. But though the wall did not look very high, and they tied the ladders together to make them very long, it was quite impossible to get to the top. The queen was in despair, but as night was coming on she ordered that they should encamp just where they were, and went to bed herself feeling quite ill. She was so disappointed. In the middle of the night she was suddenly awakened, and saw to her surprise a tiny, ugly old woman seated by her bedside, who said to her, "I must say that we consider it somewhat troublesome of your Majesty to insist upon tasting our fruit. But to save you annoyance, my sisters and I will consent to give you as much as you can carry away, on one condition. That is, that you shall give us your little daughter to bring up as our own." "Ah, my dear madam," cried the Queen, "is there nothing else that you will take for the fruit? I will give you my kingdoms willingly." "No," replied the old fairy, "we will have nothing but your little daughter. She shall be as happy as the day is long, and we will give her everything that is worth having in fairyland, but you must not see her again until she is married." "Though it is a hard condition," said the Queen, "I consent, for I shall certainly die if I do not taste the fruit, and so I should lose my little daughter either way." So the old fairy led her into the castle, and, though it was still the middle of the night, the Queen could see plainly that it was far more beautiful than she had been told, "which you can easily believe, Prince," said the White Cat, "when I tell you that it was this castle that we are now in. Will you gather the fruit yourself, Queen?" said the old fairy, "or shall I call it to come to you?" "I beg you to let me see it come when it is called," cried the Queen. "That will be something quite new." The old fairy whistled twice. Then she cried, "Apricots, peaches, nectarines, cherries, plums, pears, melons, grapes, apples, oranges, lemons, gooseberries, strawberries, raspberries, come!" And in an instant they came tumbling in one over another. And yet they were neither dusty nor spoilt, and the Queen found them quite as good as she had fancied them. You see, they grew upon fairy trees. The old fairy gave her golden baskets in which to take the fruit away, and it was as much as 400 mules could carry. Then she reminded the Queen of her agreement and led her back to the camp, and next morning she went back to her kingdom. But before she had gone very far, she began to repent of her bargain, and when the king came out to meet her, she looked so sad that he guessed that something had happened, and asked what was the matter. At first, the Queen was afraid to tell him, but when, as soon as they reached the palace, 5 frightful little dwarfs were sent by the fairies to fetch me, she was obliged to confess what she had promised. The king was very angry, and had the Queen and myself shut up in a great tower and safely guarded, and drove the little dwarfs out of his kingdom. But the fairies sent a great dragon who ate up all the people he met, and whose breath burnt up everything as he passed through the country, and at last, after trying in vain to rid himself of this monster, the king, to save his subjects, was obliged to consent that I should be given up to the fairies. This time they came themselves to fetch me, in a chariot of pearl drawn by sea-horses, followed by the dragon, who was led with chains of diamonds. My cradle was placed between the old fairies, who loaded me with caresses, and away we whirled through the air to a tower which they had built on purpose for me. There I grew up surrounded with everything that was beautiful and rare, and learning everything that is ever taught to a princess, but without any companions, but a parrot and a little dog, who could both talk, and receiving every day a visit from one of the old fairies who came mounted upon the dragon. One day, however, as I sat at my window, I saw a handsome young prince, who seemed to have been hunting in the forest which surrounded my prison, and who was standing and looking up at me. When he saw that I observed him, he saluted me with great deference. You can imagine that I was delighted to have someone new to talk to, and in spite of the height of my window, our conversation was prolonged till night fell. Then my prince reluctantly bade me farewell. But after that he came again many times, and at last I consented to marry him. But the question was, how was I to escape from my tower? The fairies always supplied me with flax for my spinning, and by great diligence I made enough cord for a ladder that would reach to the foot of the tower. But, alas, just as my prince was helping me to descend it, the crossest and ugliest of the old fairies flew in. Before he had time to defend himself, my unhappy lover was swallowed up by the dragon. As for me, the fairies, furious at having their plans defeated, for they intended me to marry the king of the dwarfs, and I utterly refused, changed me into a white cat. When they brought me here, I found all the lords and ladies of my father's court awaiting me under the same enchantment, while the people of lesser rank had been made invisible, all but their hands. As they laid me under the enchantment, the fairies told me all my history, for until then I had quite believed that I was their child, and warned me that my only chance of regaining my natural form was to win the love of a prince who resembled in every way my unfortunate lover. "And you have won it, lovely princess," interrupted the prince. "You are indeed wonderfully like him," resumed the princess, "in voice, in features, and everything, and if you really love me, all my troubles will be at an end." "And mine too," cried the prince, throwing himself at her feet, "if you will consent to marry me." "I love you already better than anyone in the world," she said. "But now it is time to go back to your father, and we shall hear what he says about it." So the prince gave her his hand and led her out, and they mounted the chariot together. It was even more splendid than before, and so was the whole company. Even the horses' shoes were of rubies with diamond nails, and I suppose that is the first time such a thing was ever seen. As the princess was as kind and clever as she was beautiful, you may imagine what a delightful journey the prince found it, for everything the princess said seemed to him quite charming. When they came near the castle where the brothers were to meet, the princess got into a chair carried by 4 of the guards. It was hewn out of one splendid crystal, and had silken curtains, which she drew round her that she might not be seen. The prince saw his brothers walking upon the terrace, each with a lovely princess, and they came to meet him, asking if he had also found a wife. He said that he had found something much rarer, a white cat, at which they laughed very much, and asked him if he was afraid of being eaten up by mice in the palace. And then they set out together for the town. Each prince and princess rode in a splendid carriage. The horses were decked with plumes of feathers and glittered with gold. After them came the youngest prince, and last of all the crystal chair, at which everybody looked with admiration and curiosity. When the courtiers saw them coming, they hastened to tell the king. "Are the ladies beautiful?" he asked anxiously. And when they answered that nobody had ever before seen such lovely princesses, he seemed quite annoyed. However, he received them graciously, but found it impossible to choose between them. Then, turning to his youngest son, he said, "Have you come back alone after all?" "Your Majesty," replied the prince, "will find in that crystal chair a little white cat, which has such soft paws and mews so prettily that I am sure you will be charmed with it." The king smiled, and went to draw back the curtains himself, but at a touch from the princess, the crystal shivered into 1,000 splinters, and there she stood in all her beauty. Her fair hair floated over her shoulders and was crowned with flowers, and her softly falling robe was of the purest white. She saluted the king gracefully, while a murmur of admiration rose from all around. "Sire," she said, "I am not come to deprive you of the throne you fill so worthily. I have already 6 kingdoms. Permit me to bestow one upon you and upon each of your sons. I ask nothing but your friendship and your consent to my marriage with your youngest son. We shall still have 3 kingdoms left for ourselves." The king and all the courtiers could not conceal their joy and astonishment, and the marriage of the 3 princes was celebrated at once. The festivities lasted several months, and then each king and queen departed to their own kingdom and lived happily ever after. The Wonderful Sheep. Once upon a time, in the days when the fairies lived, there was a king who had 3 daughters who were all young and clever and beautiful, but the youngest of the 3, who was called Miranda, was the prettiest and the most beloved. The king, her father, gave her more dresses and jewels in a month than he gave the others in a year, but she was so generous that she shared everything with her sisters, and they were all as happy and as fond of one another as they could be. Now, the king had some quarrelsome neighbors who, tired of leaving him in peace, began to make war upon him so fiercely that he feared he would be altogether beaten if he did not make an effort to defend himself. So he collected a great army and set off to fight them, leaving the princesses with their governess in a castle where news of the war was brought every day. Sometimes that the king had taken a town or won a battle, and, at last, that he had altogether overcome his enemies and chased them out of his kingdom and was coming back to the castle as quickly as possible to see his dear little Miranda, whom he loved so much. The 3 princesses put on dresses of satin, which they had had made on purpose for this great occasion, 1 green, 1 blue, and the 3rd white. Their jewels were the same colors. The eldest wore emeralds, the second turquoises, and the youngest diamonds, and thus adorned they went to meet the king, singing verses which they had composed about his victories. When he saw them all so beautiful and so gay, he embraced them tenderly, but gave Miranda more kisses than either of the others. Presently a splendid banquet was served, and the king and his daughters sat down to it. And as he always thought that there was some special meaning in everything, he said to the eldest, "Tell me why you have chosen a green dress." "Sire," she answered, "having heard of your victories, I thought that green would signify my joy and the hope of your speedy return." "That is a very good answer," said the king. "And you, my daughter," he continued, "why did you take a blue dress?" "Sire," said the princess, "to show that we constantly hoped for your success, and that the sight of you is as welcome to me as the sky with its most beautiful stars." "Why," said the king, "your wise answers astonish me. And you, Miranda, what made you dress yourself all in white?" "Because, sire," she answered, "white suits me better than anything else." "What?" said the king angrily. "Was that all you thought of, vain child?" "I thought you would be pleased with me," said the princess. "That was all." The king, who loved her, was satisfied with this, and even pretended to be pleased that she had not told him all her reasons at first. "And now," said he, "as I have supped well, and it is not time yet to go to bed, tell me what you dreamed last night." The eldest said she had dreamed that he brought her a dress, and the precious stones and gold embroidery on it were brighter than the sun. The dream of the second was that the king had brought her a spinning wheel and a distaff, that she might spin him some shirts. But the youngest said, "I dreamed that my second sister was to be married, and on her wedding day you, father, held a golden ewer and said, 'Come, Miranda, and I will hold the water, that you may dip your hands in it.' The king was very angry indeed when he heard this dream, and frowned horribly. Indeed, he made such an ugly face that everyone knew how angry he was. And he got up and went off to bed in a great hurry, but he could not forget his daughter's dream. "Does the proud girl wish to make me her slave?" he said to himself. "I am not surprised at her choosing to dress herself in white satin without a thought of me. She does not think me worthy of her consideration. But I will soon put an end to her pretensions." He rose in a fury, and although it was not yet daylight, he sent for the captain of his bodyguard and said to him, You have heard the Princess Miranda's dream? I consider that it means strange things against me. Therefore I order you to take her away into the forest and kill her, and, that I may be sure it is done, you must bring me her heart and her tongue. If you attempt to deceive me, you shall be put to death." The captain of the guard was very much astonished when he heard this barbarous order, but he did not dare to contradict the king for fear of making him still more angry or causing him to send someone else. So he answered that he would fetch the princess and do as the king had said. When he went to her room, they would hardly let him in. It was so early. But he said that the king had sent for Miranda, and she got up quickly and came out. A little black girl called Patipata held up her train, and her pet monkey and her little dog ran after her. The monkey was called Grabujon, and the little dog Tintin. The captain of the guard begged Miranda to come down into the garden where the king was enjoying the fresh air, and when they got there he pretended to search for him. But as he was not to be found, he said, "No doubt his majesty has strolled into the forest." And he opened the little door that led to it, and they went through. By this time the daylight had begun to appear, and the princess, looking at her conductor, saw that he had tears in his eyes and seemed too sad to speak. "What is the matter?" she said in the kindest way. "You seem very sorrowful." "Alas, princess," he answered, "who would not be sorrowful who was ordered to do such a terrible thing as I am? The king has commanded me to kill you here, and carry your heart and your tongue to him, and if I disobey, I shall lose my life." The poor princess was terrified. She grew very pale and began to cry softly. Looking up at the captain of the guard with her beautiful eyes, she said gently, "Will you really have the heart to kill me? I have never done you any harm, and have always spoken well of you to the king. If I had deserved my father's anger, I would suffer without a murmur, but, alas, he is unjust to complain of me, when I have always treated him with love and respect." "Fear nothing, princess," said the captain of the guard. "I would far rather die myself than hurt you. But even if I am killed, you will not be safe. We must find some way of making the king believe that you are dead." "What can we do?" said Miranda. "Unless you take him my heart and my tongue, he will never believe you." The princess and the captain of the guard were talking so earnestly that they did not think of Patipata, but she had overheard all they said, and now came and threw herself at Miranda's feet. "Madam," she said, "I offer you my life. Let me be killed. I shall be only too happy to die for such a kind mistress." "Why, Patipata," cried the princess, kissing her, "that would never do. Your life is as precious to me as my own, especially after such a proof of your affection as you have just given me." "You are right, princess," said Grabugon, coming forward, "to love such a faithful slave as Patipata. She is of more use to you than I am. I offer you my tongue and my heart most willingly, especially as I wish to make a great name for myself in Goblin Land." "No, no, my little Grabujon," replied Miranda. "I cannot bear the thought of taking your life." "Such a good little dog as I am," cried Tintin, "could not think of letting either of you die for his mistress. If anyone is to die for her, it must be me." And then began a great dispute between Patipata, Grabugon, and Tintin, and they came to high words, until at last Grabugon, who was quicker than the others, ran up to the very top of the nearest tree and let herself fall head first to the ground, and there she lay, quite dead. The princess was very sorry, but as Grabujon was really dead, she allowed the captain of the guard to take her tongue, but, alas, it was such a little one, not bigger than the princess's thumb, that they decided sorrowfully that it was of no use at all. The king would not have been taken in by it. For a moment, "Alas, my little monkey!" cried the princess. I have lost you, and yet I am no better off than I was before." "The honor of saving your life is to be mine," interrupted Patipata, and, before they could prevent her, she had picked up a knife and cut her head off in an instant. But when the captain of the guard would have taken her tongue, it turned out to be quite black, so that would not have deceived the king either. "Am I not unlucky?" cried the poor princess. "I lose everything I love, and am none the better for it." "If you had accepted my offer," said Tintin, "you would only have had me to regret, and I should have had all your gratitude." Miranda kissed her little dog, crying so bitterly that at last she could bear it no longer, and turned away into the forest. When she looked back, the captain of the guard was gone, and she was alone, except for Patipata, Grabugon, and Tintin, who lay upon the ground. She could not leave the place until she had buried them in a pretty little mossy grave at the foot of a tree, and she wrote their names upon the bark of the tree, and how they had all died to save her life. And then she began to think where she could go for safety, for this forest was so close to her father's castle that she might be seen and recognized by the first passer-by. And, besides that, it was full of lions and wolves who would have snapped up a princess just as soon as a stray chicken. So she began to walk as fast as she could. But the forest was so large and the sun was so hot that she nearly died of heat and terror and fatigue. Look which way she would. There seemed to be no end to the forest, and she was so frightened that she fancied every minute that she heard the king running after her to kill her. You may imagine how miserable she was, and how she cried as she went on, not knowing which path to follow, and with the thorny bushes scratching her dreadfully and tearing her pretty frock to pieces. At last she heard the bleating of a sheep, and said to herself, "No doubt there are shepherds here with their flocks. They will show me the way to some village where I can live, disguised as a peasant girl." Alas, it is not always kings and princes who are the happiest people in the world. Who could have believed that I should ever be obliged to run away and hide because the king, for no reason at all, wishes to kill me? So saying, she advanced toward the place where she heard the bleating. But what was her surprise when, in a lovely little glade quite surrounded by trees, she saw a large sheep. Its wool was as white as snow, and its horns shone like gold. It had a garland of flowers round its neck, and strings of great pearls about its legs, and a collar of diamonds. It lay upon a bank of orange flowers, under a canopy of cloth of gold, which protected it from the heat of the sun. Nearly 100 other sheep were scattered about, not eating the grass, but some drinking coffee, lemonade, or sherbet, others eating ices, strawberries and cream, or sweetmeats, while others, again, were playing games. Many of them wore golden collars with jewels, flowers, and ribbons. Miranda stopped short in amazement at this unexpected sight, and was looking in all directions for the shepherd of this surprising flock, when the beautiful sheep came bounding toward her. "Approach, lovely princess," he cried. "Have no fear of such gentle and peaceable animals as we are." "What a marvel!" cried the princess, starting back a little. "Here is a sheep that can talk." "Your monkey and your dog could talk, madam," said he. "Are you more astonished at us than at them?" "A fairy gave them the power to speak," replied Miranda. "So I was used to them. Perhaps the same thing has happened to us," he said, smiling sheepishly. "But, princess, what can have led you here?" "1,000 misfortunes, Sir Sheep," she answered. "I am the unhappiest princess in the world, and I am seeking a shelter against my father's anger." "Come with me, madam," said the sheep. "I offer you a hiding place which you only will know of, and where you will be mistress of everything you see." "I really cannot follow you," said Miranda, "for I am too tired to walk another step." The sheep with the golden horns ordered that his chariot should be fetched, and a moment after appeared 6 goats, harnessed to a pumpkin, which was so big that 2 people could quite well sit in it, and was all lined with cushions of velvet and down. The princess stepped into it. Much amused at such a new kind of carriage, the king of the sheep took his place beside her, and the goats ran away with them at full speed, and only stopped when they reached a cavern, the entrance to which was blocked by a great stone. This the king touched with his foot, and immediately it fell down, and he invited the princess to enter without fear. Now, if she had not been so alarmed by everything that had happened, nothing could have induced her to go into this frightful cave. But she was so afraid of what might be behind her that she would have thrown herself even down a well at this moment. So, without hesitation, she followed the sheep, who went before her, down, 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 until she thought they must come out at the other side of the world. Indeed, she was not sure that he wasn't leading her into fairyland. At last she saw before her a great plain, quite covered with all sorts of flowers, the scent of which seemed to her nicer than anything she had ever smelled before. A broad river of orange flower water flowed round it, and fountains of wine of every kind ran in all directions, and made the prettiest little cascades and brooks. The plain was covered with the strangest trees. There were whole avenues where partridges, ready roasted, hung from every branch, or, if you preferred pheasants, quails, turkeys, or rabbits, you had only to turn to the right hand or to the left, and you were sure to find them. In places the air was darkened by showers of lobster patties, white puddings, sausages, tarts, and all sorts of sweetmeats, or with pieces of gold and silver, diamonds and pearls. This unusual kind of rain, and the pleasantness of the whole place, would, no doubt, have attracted numbers of people to it, if the king of the sheep had been of a more sociable disposition. But from all accounts it is evident that he was as grave as a judge. As it was quite the nicest time of the year when Miranda arrived in this delightful land, the only palace she saw was a long row of orange trees, jasmines, honeysuckles, and musk roses, and their interlacing branches made the prettiest rooms possible, which were hung with gold and silver gauze, and had great mirrors and candlesticks, and most beautiful pictures. The wonderful sheep begged that the princess would consider herself queen over all that she saw, and assured her that, though for some years he had been very sad and in great trouble, she had it in her power to make him forget all his grief. "You are so kind and generous, noble sheep," said the princess, "that I cannot thank you enough. But I must confess that all I see here seems to me so extraordinary that I don't know what to think of it." As she spoke, a band of lovely fairies came up and offered her amber baskets full of fruit. But when she held out her hands to them, they glided away, and she could feel nothing when she tried to touch them. "Oh," she cried, "what can they be? Whom am I with?" And she began to cry. At this instant, the king of the sheep came back to her, and was so distracted to find her in tears that he could have torn his wool. "What is the matter, lovely princess?" he cried. "Has anyone failed to treat you with due respect?" "Oh, no," said Miranda, "only I am not used to living with sprites and with sheep that talk, and everything here frightens me. It was very kind of you to bring me to this place, but I shall be even more grateful to you if you will take me up into the world again." "Do not be afraid," said the wonderful sheep. "I entreat you to have patience and listen to the story of my misfortunes. I was once a king, and my kingdom was the most splendid in the world. My subjects loved me. My neighbors envied and feared me. I was respected by everyone, and it was said that no king ever deserved it more. I was very fond of hunting, and one day, while chasing a stag, I left my attendants far behind. Suddenly, I saw the animal leap into a pool of water. and I rashly urged my horse to follow it, but before we had gone many steps, I felt an extraordinary heat instead of the coolness of the water. The pond dried up, a great gulf opened before me, out of which flames of fire shot up, and I fell helplessly to the bottom of a precipice. I gave myself up for lost, but presently a voice said, "Ungrateful prince, even this fire is hardly enough to warm your cold heart." "Who complains of my coldness in this dismal place?" I cried. "An unhappy being who loves you hopelessly," replied the voice, and at the same moment the flames began to flicker and cease to burn, and I saw a fairy, whom I had known as long as I could remember, and whose ugliness had always horrified me. She was leaning upon the arm of a most beautiful young girl, who wore chains of gold on her wrists and was evidently her slave. "Why, Ragot," I said, for that was the fairy's name, "what is the meaning of all this? Is it by your orders that I am here?" "And whose fault is it," she answered, "that you have never understood me until now? Must a powerful fairy like myself condescend to explain her doings to you, who are no better than an ant, by comparison, though you think yourself a great king?" "Call me what you like," I said impatiently, "but what is it that you want? My crown? Or my cities? Or my treasures?" "Treasures," said the fairy disdainfully. "If I chose, I could make any one of my scullions richer and more powerful than you. I do not want your treasures, but," she added softly, "if you will give me your heart, if you will marry me, I will add 20 kingdoms to the one you have already. You shall have 100 castles full of gold and 500 full of silver, and, in short, anything you like to ask me for." "Madame Ragot," said I, "when one is at the bottom of a pit where one has fully expected to be roasted alive, it is impossible to think of asking such a charming person as you are to marry one. I beg that you will set me at liberty, and then I shall hope to answer you fittingly." "Ha!" said she. "If you really loved me, you would not care where you were. A cave, a wood, a foxhole, a desert would please you equally well. Do not think that you can deceive me. You fancy you are going to escape, but I assure you that you are going to stay here, and the first thing I shall give you to do will be to keep my sheep. They are very good company, and speak quite as well as you do." As she spoke, she advanced, and led me to this plain where we now stand, and showed me her flock, but I paid little attention to it or to her. To tell the truth, I was so lost in admiration of her beautiful slave that I forgot everything else, and the cruel Ragot, perceiving this, turned upon her so furious and terrible a look that she fell lifeless to the ground. At this dreadful sight I drew my sword and rushed at Ragot, and should certainly have cut off her head, had she not by her magic arts chained me to the spot on which I stood. All my efforts to move were useless, and at last, when I threw myself down on the ground in despair, she said to me with a scornful smile, "I intend to make you feel my power. It seems that you are a lion at present. I mean you to be a sheep." So saying, she touched me with her wand, and I became what you see. I did not lose the power of speech, or of feeling the misery of my present state. "For 5 years," she said, "you shall be a sheep, and lord of this pleasant land, while I, no longer able to see your face, which I loved so much, shall be better able to hate you as you deserve to be hated." She disappeared as she finished speaking, and if I had not been too unhappy to care about anything, I should have been glad that she was gone. The talking sheep received me as their king, and told me that they, too, were unfortunate princes who had in different ways offended the revengeful fairy, and had been added to her flock for a certain number of years. Some more, some less. From time to time, indeed, one regains his own proper form and goes back again to his place in the upper world. But the other beings whom you saw are the rivals or the enemies of Regot, whom she has imprisoned for 100 years or so, though even they will go back at last. The young slave of whom I told you about is one of these. I have seen her often, and it has been a great pleasure to me. She never speaks to me, and if I were nearer to her, I know I should find her only a shadow, which would be very annoying. However, I noticed that one of my companions in misfortune was also very attentive to this little sprite, and I found out that he had been her lover, whom the cruel Regot had taken away from her long before. Since then I have cared for, and thought of, nothing but how I might regain my freedom. I have often been in the forest. That is where I have seen you, lovely princess, sometimes driving your chariot, which you did with all the grace and skill in the world, sometimes riding to the chase on so spirited a horse that it seemed as if no one but yourself could have managed it, and sometimes running races on the plain with the princesses of your court, running so lightly that it was you always who won the prize. Oh, princess, I have loved you so long, and yet how dare I tell you of my love? What hope can there be for an unhappy sheep like myself? Miranda was so surprised and confused by all that she had heard that she hardly knew what answer to give to the king of the sheep, but she managed to make some kind of little speech, which certainly did not forbid him to hope, and said that she should not be afraid of the shadows. Now she knew that they would some day come to life again. "Alas," she continued, "if my poor Patipata, my dear Grabugeon, and pretty little Tintin, who all died for my sake, were equally well off, I should have nothing left to wish for here." Prisoner though he was, the king of the sheep had still some powers and privileges. "Go," said he to his master of the horse, "go and seek the shadows of the little black girl, the monkey, and the dog. They will amuse our princess." And an instant afterward, Miranda saw them coming toward her, and their presence gave her the greatest pleasure, though they did not come near enough for her to touch them. The king of the sheep was so kind and amusing, and loved Miranda so dearly, that at last she began to love him too. Such a handsome sheep, who was so polite and considerate, could hardly fail to please, especially if one knew that he was really a king, and that his strange imprisonment would soon come to an end. So the princess's days passed very gaily, while she waited for the happy time to come. The king of the sheep, with the help of all the flock, got up balls, concerts, and hunting parties, and even the shadows joined in all the fun, and came, making believe to be their own real selves. One evening, when the couriers arrived, for the king sent most carefully for news, and they always brought the very best kinds, it was announced that the sister of the Princess Miranda was going to be married to a great prince, and that nothing could be more splendid than all the preparations for the wedding. "Ah!" cried the young princess, "how unlucky I am to miss the sight of so many pretty things. Here am I imprisoned under the earth, with no company but sheep and shadows, while my sister is to be adorned like a queen and surrounded by all who love and admire her, and everyone but myself can go to wish her joy." "Why do you complain, princess?" said the king of the sheep. "Did I say that you were not to go to the wedding? Set out as soon as you please. Only promise me that you will come back, for I love you too much to be able to live without you." Miranda was very grateful to him, and promised faithfully that nothing in the world should keep her from coming back. The king caused an escort suitable to her rank to be got ready for her, and she dressed herself splendidly, not forgetting anything that could make her more beautiful. Her chariot was of mother of pearl, drawn by 6 dun-coloured griffins just brought from the other side of the world, and she was attended by a number of guards in splendid uniforms, who were all at least 8 feet high and had come from far and near to ride in the princess's train. Miranda reached her father's palace just as the wedding ceremony began, and everyone, as soon as she came in, was struck with surprise at her beauty and the splendor of her jewels. She heard exclamations of admiration on all sides, and the king— Her father looked at her so attentively that she was afraid he must recognize her, but he was so sure that she was dead that the idea never occurred to him. However, the fear of not getting away made her leave before the marriage was over. She went out hastily, leaving behind her a little coral casket set with emeralds. On it was written in diamond letters, "Jewels for the bride," and when they opened it, which they did as soon as it was found, there seemed to be no end to the pretty things it contained. The king, who had hoped to join the unknown princess and find out who she was dreadfully disappointed when she disappeared so suddenly, and gave orders that if she ever came again, the doors were to be shut, that she might not get away so easily. Short as Miranda's absence had been, it had seemed like 100 years to the King of the Sheep. He was waiting for her by a fountain in the thickest part of the forest, and the ground was strewn with splendid presents which he had prepared for her to show his joy and gratitude at her coming back. As soon as she was in sight, he rushed to meet her, leaping and bounding like a real sheep. He caressed her tenderly, throwing himself at her feet and kissing her hands, and told her how uneasy he had been in her absence, and how impatient for her return, with an eloquence which charmed her. After some time came the news that the king's second daughter was going to be married. When Miranda heard it, she begged the King of the Sheep to allow her to go and see the wedding as before. This request made him feel very sad, as if some misfortune must surely come of it, but his love for the princess being stronger than anything else, he did not like to refuse her. "You wish to leave me, princess," said he. "It is my unhappy fate. You are not to blame. I consent to your going, but, believe me, I can give you no stronger proof of my love than by so doing." The princess assured him that she would only stay a very short time, as she had done before, and begged him not to be uneasy, as she would be quite as much grieved if anything detained her as he could possibly be. So, with the same escort, she set out, and reached the palace as the marriage ceremony began. Everybody was delighted to see her. She was so pretty that they thought she must be some fairy princess, and the princes who were there could not take their eyes off her. The king was more glad than anyone else that she had come again, and gave orders that the doors should all be shut and bolted that very minute. When the wedding was all but over, the princess got up quickly, hoping to slip away unnoticed among the crowd, but, to her great dismay, she found every door fastened. She felt more at ease when the king came up to her, and with the greatest respect begged her not to run away so soon, but at least to honor him by staying for the splendid feast which was prepared for the princes and princesses. He led her into a magnificent hall, where all the court was assembled, and himself taking up the golden bowl full of water, he offered it to her that she might dip her pretty fingers into it. At this, the princess could no longer contain herself. Throwing herself at the king's feet, she cried out, "My dream has come true after all. You have offered me water to wash my hands on my sister's wedding day, and it has not vexed you to do it." The king recognized her at once. Indeed, he had already thought several times how much like his poor little Miranda she was. "Oh, my dear daughter," he cried, kissing her, "can you ever forget my cruelty? I ordered you to be put to death because I thought your dream portended the loss of my crown. And so it did," he added, "for now your sisters are both married and have kingdoms of their own, and mine shall be for you. So saying, he put his crown on the princess's head and cried, "Long live Queen Miranda!" All the court cried, "Long live Queen Miranda!" After him, and the young queen's two sisters came running up and threw their arms round her neck and kissed her 1,000 times. And then there was such a laughing and crying, talking and kissing, all at once, and Miranda thanked her father and began to ask after everyone, particularly the captain of the guard, to whom she owed so much. But, to her great sorrow, she heard that he was dead. Presently they sat down to the banquet, and the king asked Miranda to tell them all that had happened to her since the terrible morning when he had sent the captain of the guard to fetch her. This she did with so much spirit that all the guests listened with breathless interest. But while she was thus enjoying herself with the king and her sisters, the king of the sheep was waiting impatiently for the time of her return, and when it came and went, and no princess appeared, his anxiety became so great that he could bear it no longer. "She is not coming back any more," he cried. "My miserable sheep's face displeases her, and without Miranda what is left to me, wretched creature that I am? Oh, cruel Ragot, my punishment is complete." For a long time he bewailed his sad fate like this, and then, seeing that it was growing dark, and that still there was no sign of the princess, he set out as fast as he could in the direction of the town. When he reached the palace, he asked for Miranda, but by this time everyone had heard the story of her adventures, and did not want her to go back again to the king of the sheep. So they refused sternly to let him see her. In vain he begged and prayed them to let him in, though his entreaties might have melted hearts of stone. They did not move, the guards of the palace, and at last, quite broken-hearted, he fell dead at their feet. In the meantime the king, who had not the least idea of the sad thing that was happening outside the gate of his palace, proposed to Miranda that she should be driven in her chariot all round the town, which was to be illuminated with thousands and thousands of torches, placed in windows and balconies, and in all the grand squares. But what a sight met her eyes at the very entrance of the palace! There lay her dear, kind sheep, silent and motionless upon the pavement. She threw herself out of the chariot and ran to him, crying bitterly, for she realized that her broken promise had cost him his life, and for a long, long time she was so unhappy that they thought she would have died too. So you see that even a princess is not always happy, especially if she forgets to keep her word, and the greatest misfortunes often happen to people just as they think they have obtained their heart's desires. The Yellow Dwarf. Once upon a time there lived a queen who had been the mother of a great many children, and of them all only one daughter was left. But then Scheid was worth at least 1,000. Her mother, who, since the death of the king, her father, had nothing in the world she cared for so much as this little princess, was so terribly afraid of losing her that she quite spoiled her, and never tried to correct any of her faults. The consequence was that this little person, who was as pretty as possible, and was one day to wear a crown, grew up so proud and so much in love with her own beauty that she despised everyone else in the world. The queen, her mother, by her caresses and flatteries, helped to make her believe that there was nothing too good for her. She was dressed almost always in the prettiest frocks, as a fairy or as a queen going out to hunt, and the ladies of the court followed her dressed as forest fairies. And, to make her more vain than ever, the queen caused her portrait to be taken by the cleverest painters, and sent it to several neighbouring kings with whom she was very friendly. When they saw this portrait, they fell in love with the princess, every one of them, but upon each it had a different effect. One fell ill, one went quite crazy, and a few of the luckiest set off to see her as soon as possible. But these poor princes became her slaves the moment they set eyes on her. Never has there been a gayer court. 20 delightful kings did everything they could think of to make themselves agreeable, and after having spent ever so much money in giving a single entertainment, thought themselves very lucky if the princess said, "That's pretty." All this admiration vastly pleased the queen. Not a day passed, but she received 7,000 or 8,000 sonnets, and as many elegies, madrigals, and songs, which were sent her by all the poets in the world. All the prose and the poetry that was written just then was about Bellissima, for that was the princess's name, and all the bonfires that they had were made of these verses, which crackled and sparkled better than any other sort of wood. Bellissima was already 15 years old, and every one of the princes wished to marry her, but not one dared to say so. How could they, when they knew that any of them might have cut off his head 5 or 6 times a day, just to please her, and she would have thought it a mere trifle, so little did she care. You may imagine how hard-hearted her lovers thought her, and the queen, who wished to see her married, did not know how to persuade her to think of it seriously. "Bellissima," she said, "I do wish you would not be so proud. What makes you despise all these nice kings? I wish you to marry one of them, and you do not try to please me." "I am so happy," Bellissima answered. "Do leave me in peace, madam. I don't want to care for anyone." "But you would be very happy with any of these princes," said the queen, "and I shall be very angry if you fall in love with anyone who is not worthy of you." But the princess thought so much of herself that she did not consider any one of her lovers clever or handsome enough for her, and her mother, who was getting really angry at her determination not to be married, began to wish that she had not allowed her to have her own way so much. At last, not knowing what else to do, she resolved to consult a certain witch who was called the Fairy of the Desert. Now, this was very difficult to do, as she was guarded by some terrible lions. But happily, the queen had heard a long time before that whoever wanted to pass these lions safely must throw to them a cake made of millet flour, sugar candy, and crocodile's eggs. This cake she prepared with her own hands, and putting it in a little basket, she set out to seek the fairy. But as she was not used to walking far, she soon felt very tired and sat down at the foot of a tree to rest, and presently fell fast asleep. When she awoke, she was dismayed to find her basket empty. The cake was all gone, and, to make matters worse, at that moment she heard the roaring of the great lions, who had found out that she was near and were coming to look for her. "What shall I do?" she cried. "I shall be eaten up." And being too frightened to run a single step, she began to cry, and leaned against the tree under which she had been asleep. Just then she heard someone say, "Huh? She looked all round her, and then up the tree, and there she saw a little tiny man who was eating oranges. "Oh, Queen," said he, "I know you very well, and I know how much afraid you are of the lions, and you are quite right too, for they have eaten many other people. And what can you expect, as you have not any cake to give them?" "I must make up my mind to die," said the poor queen. "Alas, I should not care so much if only my dear daughter were married." "Oh, you have a daughter," cried the Yellow Dwarf, who was so called because he was a dwarf and had such a yellow face and lived in the orange tree. "I'm really glad to hear that, for I've been looking for a wife all over the world. Now, if you will promise that she shall marry me, not one of the lions, tigers, or bears shall touch you." The queen looked at him and was almost as much afraid of his ugly little face as she had been of the lions before, so that she could not speak a word. "What? You hesitate, madam?" cried the dwarf. "You must be very fond of being eaten up alive." And, as he spoke, the queen saw the lions, which were running down a hill toward them. Each one had 2 heads, 8 feet, and 4 rows of teeth, and their skins were as hard as turtle shells, and were bright red. At this dreadful sight, the poor queen, who was trembling like a dove when it sees a hawk, cried out as loud as she could, "Oh, dear Mr. Dwarf, Bellissima shall marry you." "Oh, indeed," said he disdainfully. "Bellissima is pretty enough, but I don't particularly want to marry her. You can keep her." "Oh, noble sir," said the queen in great distress, "do not refuse her. She is the most charming princess in the world." "Oh, well," he replied, "out of charity I will take her, but be sure and don't forget that she is mine." As he spoke, a little door opened in the trunk of the orange tree. In rushed the queen, only just in time, and the door shut with a bang in the faces of the lions. The queen was so confused that at first she did not notice another little door in the orange tree, but presently it opened and she found herself in a field of thistles and nettles. It was encircled by a muddy ditch, and a little further on was a tiny thatched cottage, out of which came the Yellow Dwarf with a very jaunty air. He wore wooden shoes and a little yellow coat, and as he had no hair and very long ears, he looked altogether a shocking little object. "I am delighted," said he to the queen, "that, as you are to be my mother-in-law, you should see the little house in which your Bellissima will live with me. With these thistles and nettles, she can feed a donkey which she can ride whenever she likes, under this humble roof. No weather can hurt her. She will drink the water of this brook and eat frogs, which grow very fat about here, and then she will have me always with her, handsome, agreeable, and gay as you see me now. For if her shadow stays by her more closely than I do, I shall be surprised." The unhappy queen, seeing all at once what a miserable life her daughter would have with this dwarf, could not bear the idea, and fell down insensible without saying a word. When she revived, she found to her great surprise that she was lying in her own bed at home, and, what was more, that she had on the loveliest lace nightcap that she had ever seen in her life. At first she thought that all her adventures, the terrible lions, and her promise to the Yellow Dwarf that he should marry Bellissima, must have been a dream. But there was the new cap with its beautiful ribbon and lace to remind her that it was all true, which made her so unhappy that she could neither eat, drink, nor sleep for thinking of it. The princess, who, in spite of her wilfulness, really loved her mother with all her heart, was much grieved when she saw her looking so sad, and often asked her what was the matter, but the queen, who didn't want her to find out the truth, only said that she was ill, or that one of her neighbours was threatening to make war against her. Bellissima knew quite well that something was being hidden from her, and that neither of these was the real reason of the queen's uneasiness. So she made up her mind that she would go and consult the fairy of the desert about it, especially as she had often heard how wise she was, and she thought that at the same time she might ask her advice as to whether it would be as well to be married or not. So, with great care, she made some of the proper cake to pacify the lions, and one night went up to her room very early, pretending that she was going to bed. But instead of that, she wrapped herself in a long white veil and went down a secret staircase and set off all by herself to find the witch. But when she got as far as the same fatal orange tree and saw it covered with flowers and fruit, she stopped and began to gather some of the oranges. and then, putting down her basket, she sat down to eat them. But when it was time to go on again, the basket had disappeared, and, though she looked everywhere, not a trace of it could she find. The more she hunted for it, the more frightened she got, and at last she began to cry. Then all at once she saw before her the Yellow Dwarf. "What's the matter with you, my pretty one?" said he. "What are you crying about?" "Alas," she answered, "no wonder that I am crying, seeing that I have lost the basket of cake that was to help me to get safely to the cave of the fairy of the desert." "And what do you want with her, pretty one?" said the little monster. "For I am a friend of hers, and, for the matter of that, I am quite as clever as she is." "The queen, my mother," replied the princess, "has lately fallen into such deep sadness that I fear that she will die, and I am afraid that perhaps I am the cause of it, for she very much wishes me to be married, and I must tell you truly that as yet I have not found anyone I consider worthy to be my husband. So for all these reasons I wish to talk to the fairy." "Do not give yourself any further trouble, princess," answered the dwarf. "I can tell you all you want to know better than she could. The queen, your mother, has promised you in marriage." "Has promised me?" interrupted the princess. "Oh, no, I'm sure she has not. She would have told me if she had. I am too much interested in the matter for her to promise anything without my consent." "You must be mistaken." "Beautiful princess," cried the dwarf suddenly, throwing himself on his knees before her, "I flatter myself that you will not be displeased at her choice when I tell you that it is to me she has promised the happiness of marrying you." "You!" cried Bellissima, starting back. "My mother wishes me to marry you. How can you be so silly as to think of such a thing?" "Oh, it isn't that I care much to have that honor," cried the dwarf angrily. "But here are the lions coming. They'll eat you up in 3 mouthfuls, and there will be an end of you and your pride." And indeed, at that moment the poor princess heard their dreadful howls coming nearer and nearer. "What shall I do?" she cried. "Must all my happy days come to an end like this?" The malicious dwarf looked at her and began to laugh spitefully. "At least," said he, "you have the satisfaction of dying unmarried. A lovely princess like you must surely prefer to die rather than be the wife of a poor little dwarf like myself." "Oh, don't be angry with me," cried the princess, clasping her hands. "I'd rather marry all the dwarfs in the world than die in this horrible way." "Look at me well, princess. Before you give me your word," said he, "I don't want you to promise me in a hurry." "Oh," cried she, "the lions are coming. I have looked at you enough. I am so frightened. Save me this minute, or I shall die of terror." Indeed, as she spoke, she fell down insensible, and when she recovered, she found herself in her own little bed at home. How she got there, she could not tell, but she was dressed in the most beautiful lace and ribbons, and on her finger was a little ring made of a single red hair, which fitted so tightly that, try as she might, she could not get it off. When the princess saw all these things, and remembered what had happened, she, too, fell into the deepest sadness, which surprised and alarmed the whole court and the queen more than anyone else. 100 times she asked Bellissima if anything was the matter with her, but she always said that there was nothing. At last the chief men of the kingdom, anxious to see their princess married, sent to the queen to beg her to choose a husband for her as soon as possible. She replied that nothing would please her better, but that her daughter seemed so unwilling to marry, and she recommended them to go and talk to the princess about it themselves, so this they at once did. Now Bellissima was much less proud since her adventure with the Yellow Dwarf, and she could not think of a better way of getting rid of the little monster than to marry some powerful king Therefore, she replied to their request much more favorably than they had hoped, saying that, though she was very happy as she was, still, to please them, she would consent to marry the king of the gold mines. Now, he was a very handsome and powerful prince, who had been in love with the princess for years, but had not thought that she would ever care about him at all. You can easily imagine how delighted he was when he heard the news, and how angry it made all the other kings to lose forever the hope of marrying the princess. But, after all, Bellissima could not have married 20 kings. Indeed, she had found it quite difficult enough to choose one, for her vanity made her believe that there was nobody in the world who was worthy of her. Preparations were begun at once for the grandest wedding that had ever been held at the palace. The king of the gold mines sent such immense sums of money that the whole sea was covered with the ships that brought it. Messengers were sent to all the gayest and most refined courts, particularly to the court of France, to seek out everything rare and precious to adorn the princess, although her beauty was so perfect that nothing she wore could make her look prettier. At least that is what the king of the gold mines thought, and he was never happy unless he was with her. As for the princess, the more she saw of the king, the more she liked him. He was so generous, so handsome and clever, that at last she was almost as much in love with him as he was with her. How happy they were as they wandered about in the beautiful gardens together, sometimes listening to sweet music. And the king used to write songs for Bellissima. This is one that she liked very much. In the forest all is gay. When my princess walks that way, all the blossoms then are found, downward, fluttering to the ground, hoping she may tread on them. And bright flowers on slender stem gaze up at her as she passes, brushing lightly through the grasses. Oh, my princess! Birds above echo back our songs of love, as through this enchanted land blithe we wander, hand in hand. They really were as happy as the day was long. All the king's unsuccessful rivals had gone home in despair. They said goodbye to the princess so sadly that she could not help being sorry for them. "Ah, madam," the king of the gold mines said to her, "how is this? Why do you waste your pity on these princes, who love you so much that all their trouble would be well repaid by a single smile from you?" "I should be sorry," answered Bellissima, "if you had not noticed how much I pitied these princes who were leaving me forever. But for you, sire, it is very different. You have every reason to be pleased with me, but they are going sorrowfully away, so you must not grudge them my compassion." The king of the gold mines was quite overcome by the princess's good-natured way of taking his interference, and, throwing himself at her feet, he kissed her hand 1,000 times and begged her to forgive him. At last the happy day came. Everything was ready for Bellissima's wedding. The trumpets sounded, all the streets of the town were hung with flags and strewn with flowers, and the people ran in crowds to the great square before the palace. The queen was so overjoyed that she had hardly been able to sleep at all, and she got up before it was light to give the necessary orders and to choose the jewels that the princess was to wear. These were nothing less than diamonds, even to her shoes, which were covered with them, and her dress of silver brocade was embroidered with a dozen of the sun's rays. You may imagine how much these had cost, but then nothing could have been more brilliant except the beauty of the princess. Upon her head she wore a splendid crown, her lovely hair waved nearly to her feet, and her stately figure could easily be distinguished among all the ladies who attended her. The king of the gold mines was not less noble and splendid. It was easy to see by his face how happy he was, and everyone who went near him returned loaded with presents, for all round the great banqueting hall had been arranged 1,000 barrels full of gold, and numberless bags made of velvet embroidered with pearls and filled with money. each one containing at least 100,000 gold pieces, which were given away to everyone who liked to hold out his hand, which numbers of people hastened to do, you may be sure. Indeed, some found this by far the most amusing part of the wedding festivities. The Queen and the Princess were just ready to set out with the King when they saw, advancing toward them from the end of the long gallery, two great basilisks, dragging after them a very badly made box. Behind them came a tall old woman, whose ugliness was even more surprising than her extreme old age. She wore a ruff of black taffeta, a red velvet hood, and a farthingale all in rags, and she leaned heavily upon a crutch. This strange old woman, without saying a single word, hobbled 3 times round the gallery, followed by the basilisks, then stopping in the middle and brandishing her crutch threateningly, she cried, "Ho, ho, Queen! Ho, ho, Princess! Do you think you are going to break with impunity the promise that you made to my friend the Yellow Dwarf? I am the fairy of the desert. Without the Yellow Dwarf and his orange tree, my great lions would soon have eaten you up, I can tell you. And in fairyland we do not suffer ourselves to be insulted like this. Make up your minds at once what you will do, for I vow that you shall marry the Yellow Dwarf. If you don't, may I burn my crutch." "Ah, Princess," said the Queen, weeping, "what is this that I hear? What have you promised?" "Ah, my mother," replied Bellissima sadly, "what did you promise yourself?" The King of the Gold Mines, indignant at being kept from his happiness by this wicked old woman, went up to her, and threatening her with his sword, said, "Get away out of my country at once, and for ever, miserable creature, lest I take your life, and so rid myself of your malice." He had hardly spoken these words when the lid of the box fell back on the floor with a terrible noise, and to their horror out sprang the Yellow Dwarf, mounted upon a great Spanish cat. "Rash youth," he cried, rushing between the fairy of the desert and the king, "dare to lay a finger upon this illustrious fairy. Your quarrel is with me only. I am your enemy and your rival. That faithless princess who would have married you is promised to me. See if she has not, upon her finger, a ring made of one of my hairs. Just try to take it off, and you will soon find out that I am more powerful than you are." "Wretched little monster," said the king, "do you dare to call yourself the princess's lover, and to lay claim to such a treasure? Do you know that you are a dwarf, that you are so ugly that one cannot bear to look at you, and that I should have killed you myself long before this, if you had been worthy of such a glorious death?" The Yellow Dwarf, deeply enraged at these words, set spurs to his cat, which yelled horribly, and leaped hither and thither, terrifying everybody except the brave king, who pursued the dwarf closely, till he, drawing a great knife with which he was armed, challenged the king to meet him in single combat, and rushed down into the courtyard of the palace with a terrible clatter. The king, quite provoked, followed him hastily, but they had hardly taken their places facing one another, and the whole court had only just had time to rush out upon the balconies to watch what was going on, when suddenly the sun became as red as blood, and it was so dark that they could scarcely see at all. The thunder crashed, and the lightning seemed as if it must burn up everything. The 2 basilisks appeared, one on each side of the bad dwarf, like giants, mountains high, and fire flew from their mouths and ears until they looked like flaming furnaces. None of these things could terrify the noble young king, and the boldness of his looks and actions reassured those who were looking on, and perhaps even embarrassed the Yellow Dwarf himself. But even his courage gave way when he saw what was happening to his beloved princess. For the fairy of the desert, looking more terrible than before, mounted upon a winged griffin, and with long snakes coiled round her neck, had given her such a blow with the lance she carried that Bellissima fell into the queen's arms, bleeding and senseless. Her fond mother, feeling as much hurt by the blow as the princess herself, uttered such piercing cries and lamentations that the king, hearing them, entirely lost his courage and presence of mind. Giving up the combat, he flew toward the princess, to rescue or to die with her, but the Yellow Dwarf was too quick for him. Leaping with his Spanish cat upon the balcony, he snatched Bellissima from the queen's arms, and before any of the ladies of the court could stop him, he had sprung upon the roof of the palace and disappeared with his prize. The king, motionless with horror, looked on despairingly at this dreadful occurrence, which he was quite powerless to prevent, and to make matters worse, his sight failed him. Everything became dark, and he felt himself carried along through the air by a strong hand. This new misfortune was the work of the wicked fairy of the desert, who had come with the Yellow Dwarf to help him carry off the princess, and had fallen in love with the handsome young king of the gold mines directly she saw him. She thought that if she carried him off to some frightful cavern and chained him to a rock, then the fear of death would make him forget Bellissima and become her slave. So, as soon as they reached the place, she gave him back his sight, but without releasing him from his chains, and by her magic power she appeared before him as a young and beautiful fairy, and pretended to have come there quite by chance. "What do I see?" she cried. "Is it you, dear prince? What misfortune has brought you to this dismal place?" The king, who was quite deceived by her altered appearance, replied, "Alas, beautiful fairy, the fairy who brought me here first took away my sight, but by her voice I recognized her as the fairy of the desert, though what she should have carried me off for I cannot tell you." "Ah," cried the pretended fairy, "if you have fallen into her hands, you won't get away until you have married her. She has carried off more than one prince like this, and she will certainly have anything she takes a fancy to." While she was thus pretending to be sorry for the king, he suddenly noticed her feet, which were like those of a griffin, and knew in a moment that this must be the fairy of the desert, for her feet were the one thing she could not change, however pretty she might make her face. Without seeming to have noticed anything, he said in a confidential way, "Not that I have any dislike to the fairy of the desert, but I really cannot endure the way in which she protects the Yellow Dwarf and keeps me chained here like a criminal. It is true that I love a charming princess, but if the fairy should set me free, my gratitude would oblige me to love her only." "Do you really mean what you say, prince?" said the fairy, quite deceived. "Surely," replied the prince. "How could I deceive you? You see, it is so much more flattering to my vanity to be loved by a fairy than by a simple princess. But even if I am dying of love for her, I shall pretend to hate her until I am set free." The fairy of the desert, quite taken in by these words, resolved at once to transport the prince to a pleasanter place. So, making him mount her chariot, to which she had harnessed swans instead of the bats which generally drew it, away she flew with him. But imagine the distress of the prince when, from the giddy height at which they were rushing through the air, he saw his beloved princess in a castle built of polished steel, the walls of which reflected the sun's rays so hotly that no one could approach it without being burnt to a cinder. Bellissima was sitting in a little thicket by a brook, leaning her head upon her hand and weeping bitterly, but just as they passed, she looked up and saw the king and the fairy of the desert. Now, the fairy was so clever that she could not only seem beautiful to the king, but even the poor princess thought her the most lovely being she had ever seen. "What?" she cried. "Was I not unhappy enough in this lonely castle to which that frightful Yellow Dwarf brought me? Must I also be made to know that the king of the gold mines ceased to love me as soon as he lost sight of me? But who can my rival be? whose fatal beauty is greater than mine." While she was saying this, the king, who really loved her as much as ever, was feeling terribly sad at being so rapidly torn away from his beloved princess. But he knew too well how powerful the fairy was to have any hope of escaping from her except by great patience and cunning. The fairy of the desert had also seen Bellissima, and she tried to read in the king's eyes the effect that this unexpected sight had had upon him. "No one can tell you what you wish to know better than I can," said he. "This chance meeting with an unhappy princess for whom I once had a passing fancy, before I was lucky enough to meet you, has affected me a little, I admit. But you are so much more to me than she is, that I would rather die than leave you." "Ah, Prince," she said, "can I believe that you really love me so much?" "Time will show, madam," replied the king. "But if you wish to convince me that you have some regard for me, do not, I beg of you, refuse to aid Bellissima. Do you know what you are asking?" said the fairy of the desert, frowning and looking at him suspiciously. "Do you want me to employ my art against the Yellow Dwarf, who is my best friend, and take away from him a proud princess whom I can but look upon as my rival?" The king sighed, but made no answer. Indeed, what was there to be said to such a clear-sighted person? At last they reached a vast meadow, gay with all sorts of flowers. A deep river surrounded it, and many little brooks murmured softly under the shady trees, where it was always cool and fresh. A little way off stood a splendid palace, the walls of which were of transparent emeralds. As soon as the swans which drew the fairy's chariot had alighted under a porch, which was paved with diamonds and had arches of rubies, they were greeted on all sides by thousands of beautiful beings who came to meet them joyfully, singing these words: "When love within a heart would reign, useless to strive against him, 'tis. The proud but feel a sharper pain, and make a greater triumph his." The fairy of the desert was delighted to hear them sing of her triumphs. She led the king into the most splendid room that can be imagined, and left him alone for a little while, just that he might not feel that he was a prisoner, but he felt sure that she had not really gone quite away, but was watching him from some hiding place. So, walking up to a great mirror, he said to it, "Trusty counselor, let me see what I can do to make myself agreeable to the charming fairy of the desert, for I can think of nothing but how to please her." And he at once set to work to curl his hair, and, seeing upon a table a grander coat than his own, he put it on carefully. The fairy came back so delighted that she could not conceal her joy. "I am quite aware of the trouble you have taken to please me," said she, "and I must tell you that you have succeeded perfectly already. You see, it is not difficult to do if you really care for me." The king, who had his own reasons for wishing to keep the old fairy in a good humour, did not spare pretty speeches, and after a time he was allowed to walk by himself upon the seashore. The fairy of the desert had by her enchantments raised such a terrible storm that the boldest pilot would not venture out in it. So she was not afraid of her prisoners being able to escape, and he found it some relief to think sadly over his terrible situation without being interrupted by his cruel captor. Presently, after walking wildly up and down, he wrote these verses upon the sand with his stick: "At last may I upon this shore lighten my sorrow with soft tears. Alas, alas, I see no more my love, who yet my sadness cheers. And thou, O raging stormy sea, stirred by wild winds from depth to height, thou hold'st my loved one far from me, and I am captive to thy might. My heart is still more wild than thine, for fate is cruel unto me. Why must I thus in exile pine? Why is my princess snatched from me? O lovely nymphs from ocean caves, who know how sweet true love may be, come up and calm the furious waves and set a desperate lover free." While he was still writing, he heard a voice which attracted his attention in spite of himself. Seeing that the waves were rolling in higher than ever, he looked all round, and presently saw a lovely lady floating gently toward him upon the crest of a huge billow. Her long hair spread all about her. In one hand she held a mirror, and in the other a comb, and instead of feet she had a beautiful tail like a fish, with which she swam. The king was struck dumb with astonishment at this unexpected sight, but as soon as she came within speaking distance, she said to him, "I know how sad you are at losing your princess and being kept a prisoner by the fairy of the desert. If you like, I will help you to escape from this fatal place, where you may otherwise have to drag on a weary existence for 30 years or more." The king of the gold mines hardly knew what answer to make to this proposal, not because he did not wish very much to escape, but he was afraid that this might be only another device by which the fairy of the desert was trying to deceive him. As he hesitated, the mermaid, who guessed his thoughts, said to him, "You may trust me. I am not trying to entrap you. I am so angry with the Yellow Dwarf and the fairy of the desert that I am not likely to wish to help them, especially since I constantly see your poor princess, whose beauty and goodness make me pity her so much, and I tell you that if you will have confidence in me, I will help you to escape." "I trust you absolutely," cried the king, "and I will do whatever you tell me. But if you have seen my princess, I beg of you to tell me how she is and what is happening to her." "We must not waste time in talking," said she. "Come with me, and I will carry you to the castle of steel, and we will leave upon this shore a figure so like you that even the fairy herself will be deceived by it." So saying, she quickly collected a bundle of seaweed, and, blowing it 3 times, she said, "My friendly seaweeds, I order you to stay here, stretched upon the sand, until the fairy of the desert comes to take you away." And at once the seaweeds became like the king, who stood looking at them in great astonishment, for they were even dressed in a coat like his, but they lay there pale and still, as the king himself might have lain if one of the great waves had overtaken him and thrown him senseless upon the shore. And then the mermaid caught up the king, and away they swam joyfully together. "Now," said she, "I have time to tell you about the princess. In spite of the blow which the fairy of the desert gave her, the Yellow Dwarf compelled her to mount behind him upon his terrible Spanish cat, but she soon fainted away with pain and terror, and did not recover till they were within the walls of his frightful castle of steel. Here she was received by the prettiest girls it was possible to find, who had been carried there by the Yellow Dwarf, who hastened to wait upon her and showed her every possible attention. She was laid upon a couch covered with cloth of gold, embroidered with pearls as big as nuts. "Ah," interrupted the king of the gold mines, "if Bellissima forgets me and consents to marry him, I shall break my heart." "You need not be afraid of that," answered the mermaid. "The princess thinks of no one but you, and the frightful dwarf cannot persuade her to look at him." "Pray go on with your story," said the king. "What more is there to tell you?" replied the mermaid. "Bellissima was sitting in the wood when you passed, and saw you with the fairy of the desert, who was so cleverly disguised that the princess took her to be prettier than herself. You may imagine her despair, for she thought that you had fallen in love with her." "She believes that I love her," cried the king. "What a fatal mistake! What is to be done to undeceive her?" "You know best," answered the mermaid, smiling kindly at him. "When people are as much in love with one another as you two are, they don't need advice from anyone else." As she spoke, they reached the castle of steel, the side next the sea being the only one which the Yellow Dwarf had left unprotected by the dreadful burning walls. "I know quite well," said the mermaid, that the princess is sitting by the brookside, just where you saw her as you passed. But as you will have many enemies to fight with before you can reach her, take this sword. Armed with it, you may dare any danger and overcome the greatest difficulties. Only beware of one thing, that is, never to let it fall from your hand. Farewell. Now I will wait by that rock, and if you need my help in carrying off your beloved princess, I will not fail you, for the queen, her mother, is my best friend, and it was for her sake that I went to rescue you." So saying, she gave to the king a sword made from a single diamond, which was more brilliant than the sun. He could not find words to express his gratitude, but he begged her to believe that he fully appreciated the importance of her gift, and would never forget her help and kindness. We must now go back to the fairy of the desert. When she found that the king did not return, she hastened out to look for him, and reached the shore with 100 of the ladies of her train loaded with splendid presents for him. Some carried baskets full of diamonds, others golden cups of wonderful workmanship, and amber, coral, and pearls. Others, again, balanced upon their heads bales of the richest and most beautiful stuffs, while the rest brought fruit and flowers, and even birds. But what was the horror of the fairy who followed this gay troop when she saw, stretched upon the sands, the image of the king which the mermaid had made with the seaweeds? Struck with astonishment and sorrow, she uttered a terrible cry and threw herself down beside the pretended king, weeping and howling and calling upon her 11 sisters, who were also fairies and who came to her assistance. But they were all taken in by the image of the king, for, clever as they were, the mermaid was still cleverer, and all they could do was to help the fairy of the desert to make a wonderful monument over what they thought was the grave of the king of the gold mines. But while they were collecting jasper and porphyry, agate and marble, gold and bronze, statues and devices, to immortalize the king's memory, he was thanking the good mermaid and begging her still to help him, which she graciously promised to do as she disappeared, and then he set out for the castle of steel. He walked fast, looking anxiously round him and longing once more to see his darling Bellissima. But he had not gone far before he was surrounded by 4 terrible sphinxes, who would very soon have torn him to pieces with their sharp talons if it had not been for the mermaid's diamond sword. For no sooner had he flashed it before their eyes than down they fell at his feet quite helpless, and he killed them with one blow. But he had hardly turned to continue his search when he met 6 dragons covered with scales that were harder than iron. Frightful as this encounter was, the king's courage was unshaken, and by the aid of his wonderful sword he cut them in pieces, one after the other. Now he hoped his difficulties were over, but at the next turning he was met by one which he did not know how to overcome. 24 pretty and graceful nymphs advanced toward him, holding garlands of flowers, with which they barred the way. "Where are you going, Prince?" they said. "It is our duty to guard this place, and if we let you pass, great misfortunes will happen to you and to us. We beg you not to insist upon going on. Do you want to kill 24 girls who have never displeased you in any way?" The king did not know what to do or to say. It went against all his ideas as a knight to do anything a lady begged him not to do. But as he hesitated, a voice in his ear said, "Strike, strike, and do not spare, or your princess is lost forever." So, without reply to the nymphs, he rushed forward instantly, breaking their garlands and scattering them in all directions, and then went on without further hindrance to the little wood where he had seen Bellissima. She was seated by the brook, looking pale and weary when he reached her, and he would have thrown himself down at her feet. but she drew herself away from him with as much indignation as if he had been the Yellow Dwarf. "Ah, Princess," he cried, "do not be angry with me. Let me explain everything. I am not faithless or to blame for what has happened. I am a miserable wretch who has displeased you without being able to help himself." "Ah," cried Bellissima, "did I not see you flying through the air with the loveliest being imaginable? Was that against your will?" "Indeed it was, Princess," he answered. "The wicked fairy of the desert, not content with chaining me to a rock, carried me off in her chariot to the other end of the earth, where I should even now be a captive, but for the unexpected help of a friendly mermaid, who brought me here to rescue you, my princess, from the unworthy hands that hold you. Do not refuse the aid of your most faithful lover." So saying, he threw himself at her feet and held her by her robe. But, alas! In so doing he let fall the magic sword, and the Yellow Dwarf, who was crouching behind a lettuce, no sooner saw it than he sprang out and seized it, well knowing its wonderful power. The princess gave a cry of terror on seeing the dwarf, but this only irritated the little monster. Muttering a few magical words, he summoned 2 giants, who bound the king with great chains of iron. "Now," said the dwarf, "I am master of my rival's fate, but I will give him his life and permission to depart unharmed if you, princess, will consent to marry me." "Let me die 1,000 times rather," cried the unhappy king. "Alas!" cried the princess. "Must you die? Could anything be more terrible?" "That you should marry that little wretch would be far more terrible," answered the king. "At least," continued she, "let us die together." "Let me have the satisfaction of dying for you, my princess," said he. "Oh, no, no," she cried, turning to the dwarf. "Rather than that, I will do as you wish." "Cruel princess," said the king, "would you make my life horrible to me by marrying another before my eyes?" "Not so," replied the Yellow Dwarf. "You are a rival of whom I am too much afraid. You shall not see our marriage." So saying, in spite of Bellissima's tears and cries, he stabbed the king to the heart with the diamond sword. The poor princess, seeing her lover lying dead at her feet, could no longer live without him. She sank down by him and died of a broken heart. So ended these unfortunate lovers, whom not even the mermaid could help, because all the magic power had been lost with the diamond sword. As to the wicked dwarf, he preferred to see the princess dead rather than married to the king of the gold mines, and the fairy of the desert, when she heard of the king's adventures, pulled down the grand monument which she had built, and was so angry at the trick that had been played her that she hated him as much as she had loved him before. The kind mermaid, grieved at the sad fate of the lovers, caused them to be changed into 2 tall palm trees, which stand always side by side, whispering together of their faithful love and caressing one another with their interlacing branches. Toads and diamonds. There was once upon a time a widow who had 2 daughters. The eldest was so much like her in the face and humour that whoever looked upon the daughter saw the mother. They were both so disagreeable and so proud that there was no living with them. The youngest, who was the very picture of her father for courtesy and sweetness of temper, was withal one of the most beautiful girls ever seen. As people naturally love their own likeness, this mother even doted on her eldest daughter, and at the same time had a horrible aversion for the youngest. She made her eat in the kitchen and work continually. Among other things, this poor child was forced twice a day to draw water above 1.5 miles off the house and bring home a pitcher full of it. One day, as she was at this fountain, there came to her a poor woman, who begged of her to let her drink. "Oh, "Aye, with all my heart, goody," said this pretty little girl, and rinsing immediately the pitcher, she took up some water from the clearest place of the fountain and gave it to her, holding up the pitcher all the while, that she might drink the easier. The good woman, having drunk, said to her, "You are so very pretty, my dear, so good and so mannerly, that I cannot help giving you a gift." For this was a fairy who had taken the form of a poor country woman, to see how far the civility and good manners of this pretty girl would go. "I will give you for a gift," continued the fairy, "that at every word you speak, there shall come out of your mouth either a flower or a jewel." When this pretty girl came home, her mother scolded her for staying so long at the fountain. "I beg your pardon, mamma," said the poor girl, "for not making more haste." And in speaking these words, there came out of her mouth 2 roses, 2 pearls, and 2 diamonds. "What is it I see there?" said the mother, quite astonished. "I think I see pearls and diamonds come out of the girl's mouth. How happens this, child?" This was the first time she had ever called her child. The poor creature told her frankly all the matter, not without dropping out infinite numbers of diamonds. "In good faith," cried the mother, "I must send my child thither. Come hither, Fanny, look what comes out of thy sister's mouth when she speaks." "Wouldst not thou be glad, my dear, to have the same gift given thee? Thou hast nothing else to do but go and draw water out of the fountain, and when a certain poor woman asks you to let her drink, to give it to her very civilly. It would be a very fine sight indeed," said this ill-bred minx, "to see me go draw water." "You shall go, hussy," said the mother, "and this minute." So away she went, but grumbling all the way, taking with her the best silver tankard in the house. She was no sooner at the fountain than she saw coming out of the wood a lady most gloriously dressed, who came up to her and asked to drink. This was, you must know, the very fairy who appeared to her sister, but now had taken the air and dress of a princess, to see how far this girl's rudeness would go. "Am I come hither," said the proud, saucy one, "to serve you with water, pray? I suppose the silver tankard was brought purely for your ladyship, was it? However, you may drink out of it, if you have a fancy." "You are not over and above mannerly," answered the fairy, without putting herself in a passion. "Well, then, since you have so little breeding, and are so disobliging, I give you for a gift that at every word you speak there shall come out of your mouth a snake or a toad." So soon as her mother saw her coming, she cried out, "Well, daughter?" "Well, mother?" answered the pert hussy, throwing out of her mouth 2 vipers and 2 toads. "Oh, mercy!" cried the mother. "What is it I see? Oh, it is that wretch, her sister, who has occasioned all this, but she shall pay for it." And immediately she ran to beat her. The poor child fled away from her, and went to hide herself in the forest, not far from thence. The king's son then, on his return from hunting, met her, and seeing her so very pretty, asked her what she did there alone, and why she cried. "Alas, sir, my mamma has turned me out of doors." The king's son, who saw 5 or 6 pearls and as many diamonds come out of her mouth, desired her to tell him how that happened. She thereupon told him the whole story, and so the king's son fell in love with her, and, considering himself that such a gift was worth more than any marriage portion, conducted her to the palace of the king, his father, and there married her. As for the sister, she made herself so much hated that her own mother turned her off, and the miserable wretch, having wandered about a good while without finding anybody to take her in, went to a corner of the wood, and there died. Trusty John. Once upon a time there was an old king who was so ill that he thought to himself, "I am most likely on my deathbed." Then he said, Send Trusty John to me." Now, Trusty John was his favourite servant, and was so called because all his life he had served him so faithfully. When he approached the bed, the king spake to him, "Most trusty John, I feel my end is drawing near, and I could face it without a care, were it not for my son. He is still too young to decide everything for himself, and, unless you promise me to instruct him in all he should know, and to be to him as a father, I shall not close my eyes in peace." Then Trusty John answered, "I will never desert him, and will serve him faithfully, even though it should cost me my life." Then the old king said, "Now I die, comforted and in peace." And then he went on, "After my death, you must show him the whole castle, all the rooms and apartments and vaults, and all the treasures that lie in them. But you must not show him the last room in the long passage, where the picture of the Princess of the Golden Roof is hidden. When he beholds that picture, he will fall violently in love with it and go off into a dead faint, and for her sake he will encounter many dangers. You must guard him from this." And when Trusty John had again given the king his hand upon it, the old man became silent, laid his head on the pillow, and died. When the old king had been carried to his grave, Trusty John told the young king what he had promised his father on his deathbed, and added, "And I shall assuredly keep my word, and shall be faithful to you as I have been to him, even though it should cost me my life." Now when the time of mourning was over, Trusty John said to him, "It is time you should see your inheritance. I will show you your ancestral castle." So he took him over everything, and let him see all the riches and splendid apartments. Only the one room where the picture was he did not open. But the picture was placed so that if the door opened, you gazed straight upon it, and it was so beautifully painted that you imagined it lived and moved, and that it was the most lovable and beautiful thing in the whole world. But the young king noticed that Trusty John always missed one door, and said, "Why do you never open this one for me?" "There is something inside that would appall you," he answered. But the king replied, "I have seen the whole castle, and shall find out what is in there." And with these words he approached the door and wanted to force it open. But Trusty John held him back, and said, "I promised your father before his death that you shouldn't see what that room contains. It might bring both you and me to great grief." "Ah, no," answered the young king. "If I don't get in, it will be my certain destruction. I should have no peace, night or day, till I had seen what was in the room with my own eyes. Now I don't budge from the spot till you have opened the door." Then Trusty John saw there was no way out of it. So, with a heavy heart and many sighs, he took the key from the big bunch. When he had opened the door, he stepped in first, and thought to cover the likeness so that the king might not perceive it. But it was hopeless. The king stood on tiptoe and looked over his shoulder, and when he saw the picture of the maid, so beautiful and glittering with gold and precious stones, he fell swooning to the ground. Trusty John lifted him up, carried him to bed, and thought sorrowfully, "The curse has come upon us, gracious heaven. What will be the end of it all?" Then he poured wine down his throat till he came to himself again. The first words he spoke were, "Oh, who is the original of the beautiful picture?" "She is the Princess of the Golden Roof," answered Trusty John. Then the king continued, "My love for her is so great that if all the leaves on the trees had tongues, they could not express it. My very life depends on my winning her. You are my most trusty John. You must stand by me." The faithful servant pondered long how they were to set about the matter, for it was said to be difficult even to get into the presence of the princess. At length he hit upon a plan, and spoke to the king. All the things she has about her, tables, chairs, dishes, goblets, bowls, and all her household furniture, are made of gold. You have in your treasure 5 tons of gold. Let the goldsmiths of your kingdom manufacture them into all manner of vases and vessels, into all sorts of birds and game and wonderful beasts that will please her. We shall go to her with them and try our luck." The king summoned all his goldsmiths, and they had to work hard, day and night, till at length the most magnificent things were completed. When a ship had been laden with them, the faithful John disguised himself as a merchant, and the king had to do the same, so that they should be quite unrecognizable. And so they crossed the seas and journeyed till they reached the town where the princess of the golden roof dwelt. Trusty John made the king remain behind on the ship and await his return. "Perhaps," he said, "I may bring the princess back with me. So see that everything is in order. Let the gold ornaments be arranged and the whole ship decorated." Then he took a few of the gold things in his apron, went ashore, and proceeded straight to the palace. When he came to the courtyard, he found a beautiful maiden standing at the well, drawing water with 2 golden pails. And as she was about to carry away the glittering water, she turned round and saw the stranger, and asked him who he was. Then he replied, "I am a merchant," and opening his apron, he let her peep in. "Oh, my!" she cried, "what beautiful gold wares!" She set down her pails and examined one thing after the other. Then she said, "The princess must see this. She has such a fancy for gold things that she will buy up all you have." She took him by the hand and led him into the palace, for she was the lady's maid. When the princess had seen the wares, she was quite enchanted, and said, "They are all so beautifully made that I shall buy everything you have." But Trusty John said, "I am only the servant of a rich merchant. What I have here is nothing compared to what my master has on his ship. His merchandise is more artistic and costly than anything that has ever been made in gold before." She desired to have everything brought up to her, but he said, "There is such a quantity of things that it would take many days to bring them up, and they would take up so many rooms that you would have no space for them in your house." Thus her desire and curiosity were excited to such an extent that at last she said, "Take me to your ship. I shall go there myself and view your master's treasures." Then Trusty John was quite delighted, and brought her to the ship. And the king, when he beheld her, saw that she was even more beautiful than her picture, and thought every moment that his heart would burst. She stepped on to the ship, and the king led her inside. But Trusty John remained behind with the steersman, and ordered the ship to push off. "Spread all sail, that we may fly on the ocean like a bird in the air." Meanwhile, the king showed the princess inside all his gold wares, every single bit of it, dishes, goblets, bowls, the birds and game, and all the wonderful beasts. Many hours passed thus, and she was so happy that she did not notice that the ship was sailing away. After she had seen the last thing, she thanked the merchant and prepared to go home. But when she came to the ship's side, she saw that they were on the high seas, far from land, and that the ship was speeding on its way under full canvas. "Oh," she cried in terror, "I am deceived, carried away and betrayed into the power of a merchant. I would rather have died." But the king seized her hand and spake, "I am no merchant, but a king of as high birth as yourself, and it was my great love for you that made me carry you off by stratagem. The first time I saw your likeness, I fell to the ground in a swoon." When the princess of the golden roof heard this, she was comforted, and her heart went out to him, so that she willingly consented to become his wife. Now it happened one day, while they were sailing on the high seas, that Trusty John, sitting on the forepart of the ship, fiddling away to himself, observed 3 ravens in the air flying toward him. He ceased playing and listened to what they were saying, for he understood their language. The one croaked, "Oh, oh, oh! So he's bringing the Princess of the Golden Roof home." "Yes," answered the second, "but he's not got her yet." "Yes, he has," spake the third, "for she's sitting beside him on the ship." Then number 1 began again and cried, "That'll not help him. When they reach the land, a chestnut horse will dash forward to greet them. The king will wish to mount it, and if he does, it will gallop away with him and disappear into the air, and he will never see his bride again." "Is there no escape for him?" asked number 2. "Oh, yes. If someone else mounts quickly and shoots the horse dead with the pistol that is sticking in the holster, then the young king is saved." "But who's to do that?" "And anyone who knows it and tells him will be turned into stone from his feet to his knees." Then spake number 2, "I know more than that. Even if the horse is slain, the young king will still not keep his bride. When they enter the palace together, they will find a ready-made wedding shirt in a cupboard, which looks as though it were woven of gold and silver, but is really made of nothing but sulphur and tar. When the king puts it on, it will burn him to his marrow and bones." Number 3 asked, "Is there no way of escape then?" "Oh, yes," answered number 2. "If someone seizes the shirt with gloved hands and throws it into the fire, and lets it burn, then the young king is saved. But what's the good? Anyone knowing this and telling it will have half his body turned into stone, from his knees to his heart." Then number 3 spake, "I know yet more. Though the bridal shirt too be burnt, the king hasn't even then secured his bride when the dance is held after the wedding and the young queen is dancing. She will suddenly grow deadly white and drop down like one dead, and unless someone lifts her up and draws 3 drops of blood from her right side and spits them out again, she will die. But if anyone who knows this betrays it, he will be turned into stone from the crown of his head to the soles of his feet." When the ravens had thus conversed, they fled onward, but Trusty John had taken it all in, and was sad and depressed from that time forward. For if he were silent to his master concerning what he had heard, he would involve him in misfortune. But if he took him into his confidence, then he himself would forfeit his life. At last he said, "I will stand by my master, though it should be my ruin." Now when they drew near the land, it came to pass just as the ravens had predicted, and a splendid chestnut horse bounded forward. "Capital," said the king, "this animal shall carry me to my palace," and was about to mount. But Trusty John was too sharp for him, and, springing up quickly, seized the pistol out of the holster and shot the horse dead. Then the other servants of the king, who at no time looked favourably on Trusty John, cried out, "What a sin to kill the beautiful beast that was to bear the king to his palace!" But the king spake, "Silence, let him alone. He is ever my most trusty John. Who knows for what good end he may have done this thing?" So they went on their way and entered the palace, and there in the hall stood a cupboard in which lay the ready-made bridal shirt, looking for all the world as though it were made of gold and silver. The young king went toward it and was about to take hold of it, but Trusty John, pushing him aside, seized it with his gloved hands, threw it hastily into the fire, and let it burn. The other servants commenced grumbling again and said, "See, he's actually burning the king's bridal shirt." But the young king spoke, "Who knows for what good purpose he does it? Let him alone, he is my most trusty John." Then the wedding was celebrated. The dance began, and the bride joined in, but Trusty John watched her countenance carefully. Of a sudden she grew deadly white, and fell to the ground as if she were dead. He at once sprang hastily toward her, lifted her up, and bore her to a room, where he laid her down, and kneeling beside her he drew 3 drops of blood from her right side, and spat them out. She soon breathed again and came to herself, but the young king had watched the proceeding, and not knowing why Trusty John had acted as he did, he flew into a passion and cried, "Throw him into prison!" On the following morning sentence was passed on Trusty John, and he was condemned to be hanged. As he stood on the gallows, he said, "Everyone doomed to death has the right to speak once before he dies, and I too have that privilege." "Yes," said the king, "it shall be granted to you." So Trusty John spoke, "I am unjustly condemned, for I have always been faithful to you." And he proceeded to relate how he had heard the raven's conversation on the sea, and how he had to do all he did in order to save his master. Then the king cried, "Oh, my most trusty John, pardon, pardon, take him down." But as he uttered the last word, Trusty John had fallen lifeless to the ground, and was a stone. The king and queen were in despair, and the king spake, "Ah, how ill have I rewarded such great fidelity," and made them lift up the stone image and place it in his bedroom near his bed. As often as he looked at it, he wept and said, "Oh, if I could only restore you to life, my most trusty John." After a time, the queen gave birth to twins, 2 small sons, who throve and grew, and were a constant joy to her. One day, when the queen was at church, and the 2 children sat and played with their father, he gazed again full of grief on the stone statue, and sighing wailed, "Oh, if I could only restore you to life, my most trusty John." Suddenly the stone began to speak, and said, "Yes, you can restore me to life again if you are prepared to sacrifice what you hold most dear." And the king cried out, "All I have in the world will I give up for your sake." The stone continued, "If you cut off with your own hand the heads of your 2 children and smear me with their blood, I shall come back to life." The king was aghast when he heard that he had himself to put his children to death. But when he thought of Trusty John's fidelity, and how he had even died for him, he drew his sword, and with his own hand cut the heads off his children. And when he had smeared the stone with their blood, life came back, and Trusty John stood once more safe and sound before him. He spake to the king, "Your loyalty shall be rewarded." And taking up the heads of the children, he placed them on their bodies, smeared the wounds with their blood, and in a minute they were all right again and jumping about as if nothing had happened. Then the king was full of joy, and when he saw the queen coming, he hid Trusty John and the 2 children in a big cupboard. As she entered, he said to her, "Did you pray in church?" "Yes," she answered, "but my thoughts dwelt constantly on Trusty John, and of what he has suffered for us." Then he spake, "Dear wife, we can restore him to life, but the price asked is our 2 little sons. We must sacrifice them." The queen grew white, and her heart sank, but she replied, "We owe it to him on account of his great fidelity." Then he rejoiced that she was of the same mind as he had been, and going forward he opened the cupboard and fetched the 2 children and Trusty John out, saying, "God be praised! Trusty John is free once more, and we have our 2 small sons again." Then he related to her all that had passed, and they lived together happily ever afterward. Why the sea is salt. Once upon a time, long, long ago, there were 2 brothers, the one rich and the other poor. When Christmas Eve came, the poor one had not a bite in the house, either of meat or bread, so he went to his brother and begged him, in God's name, to give him something for Christmas Day. It was by no means the first time that the brother had been forced to give something to him, and he was not better pleased at being asked now than he generally was. "If you will do what I ask you, you shall have a whole ham," said he. The poor one immediately thanked him and promised this. "Well, here is the ham, and now you must go straight to Dead Man's Hall," said the rich brother, throwing the ham to him. "Well, I will do what I have promised," said the other, and he took the ham and set off. He went on and on for the livelong day, and at nightfall he came to a place where there was a bright light. "I have no doubt this is the place," thought the man with the ham. An old man with a long white beard was standing in the outhouse, chopping Yule logs. "Good evening," said the man with the ham. "Good evening to you." "Where are you going at this late hour?" said the man. "I am going to Dead Man's Hall, if only I am on the right track," answered the poor man. "Oh, yes, you are right enough, for it is here," said the old man. "When you get inside, they will all want to buy your ham, for they don't get much meat to eat there. But you must not sell it unless you can get the hand mill, which stands behind the door for it. When you come out again, I will teach you how to stop the hand mill, which is useful for almost everything." So the man with the ham thanked the other for his good advice and rapped at the door. When he got in, everything happened just as the old man had said it would. All the people, great and small, came round him like ants on an ant-hill, and each tried to outbid the other for the ham. "By rights, my old woman and I ought to have it for our Christmas dinner, but since you have set your hearts upon it, I must just give it up to you," said the man. "But if I sell it, I will have the hand mill which is standing there behind the door." At first they would not hear of this, and haggled and bargained with the man, but he stuck to what he had said, and the people were forced to give him the hand mill. When the man came out again into the yard, he asked the old woodcutter how he was to stop the hand mill, and when he had learned that, he thanked him and set off home with all the speed he could, but did not get there until after the clock had struck 12 on Christmas Eve. "Where in the world have you been?" said the old woman. "Here I have sat waiting hour after hour, and have not even 2 sticks to lay across each other under the Christmas porridge pot." "Oh, I could not come before. I had something of importance to see about, and a long way to go too, but now you shall just see," said the man, and then he set the hand mill on the table and bade it first grind light, then a tablecloth, and then meat and beer, and everything else that was good for a Christmas Eve supper, and the mill ground all that he ordered. "Bless me," said the old woman as one thing after another appeared, and she wanted to know where her husband had got the mill from, but he would not tell her that. "Never mind where I got it. You can see that it is a good one, and the water that turns it will never freeze," said the man. So he ground meat and drink, and all kinds of good things, to last all Christmas-tide. And on the 3rd day he invited all his friends to come to a feast. Now when the rich brother saw all that there was at the banquet and in the house, he was both vexed and angry, for he grudged everything his brother had. On Christmas Eve he was so poor that he came to me and begged for a trifle, for God's sake, and now he gives a feast as if he were both a count and a king, thought he. "But for heaven's sake tell me where you got your riches from," said he to his brother. "From behind the door," said he who owned the mill, for he did not choose to satisfy his brother on that point, but later in the evening, when he had taken a drop too much, he could not refrain from telling how he had come by the hand mill. "There you see what has brought me all my wealth," said he, and brought out the mill and made it grind first one thing and then another. When the brother saw that, he insisted on having the mill, and after a great deal of persuasion got it, but he had to give $300 for it, and the poor brother was to keep it till the haymaking was over, for he thought, "If I keep it as long as that, I can make it grind meat and drink that will last many a long year." During that time you may imagine that the mill did not grow rusty, and when hay harvest came, the rich brother got it, but the other had taken good care not to teach him how to stop it. It was evening when the rich man got the mill home, and in the morning he bade the old woman go out and spread the hay after the mowers, and he would attend to the house himself that day, he said. So, when dinner time drew near, he set the mill on the kitchen table and said, "Grind herrings and milk pottage, and do it both quickly and well." So the mill began to grind herrings and milk pottage, and first all the dishes and tubs were filled, and then it came out all over the kitchen floor. The man twisted and turned it, and did all he could to make the mill stop, but howsoever he turned it and screwed it, the mill went on grinding, and in a short time the pottage rose so high that the man was like to be drowned. So he threw open the parlour door, but it was not long before the mill had ground the parlour full too, and it was with difficulty and danger that the man could go through the stream of pottage and get hold of the door latch. When he got the door open, he did not stay long in the room, but ran out, and the herrings and pottage came after him, and it streamed out over both farm and field. Now the old woman, who was out spreading the hay, began to think dinner was long in coming, and said to the women and the mowers, "Though the master does not call us home, we may as well go. It may be that he finds he is not good at making pottage, and I should do well to help him." So they began to straggle homeward, but when they had got a little way up the hill, they met the herrings and pottage and bread all pouring forth and winding about, one over the other, and the man himself in front of the flood. "Would to heaven that each of you had 100 stomachs! Take care that you are not drowned in the pottage," he cried as he went by them, as if mischief were at his heels, down to where his brother dwelt. Then he begged him, for God's sake, to take the mill back again, and that in an instant, for, said he, if it grind 1 hour more, the whole district will be destroyed by herrings and pottage. But the brother would not take it until the other paid him $300, and that he was obliged to do. Now the poor brother had both the money and the mill again. So it was not long before he had a farmhouse much finer than that in which his brother lived. But the mill ground him so much money that he covered it with plates of gold, and the farmhouse lay close by the seashore, so it shone and glittered far out to sea. Everyone who sailed by there now had to be put in to visit the rich man in the gold farmhouse, and everyone wanted to see the wonderful mill, for the report of it spread far and wide, and there was no one who had not heard tell of it. After a long, long time came also a skipper who wished to see the mill. He asked if it could make salt. "Yes, it could make salt," said he who owned it. And when the skipper heard that, he wished with all his might and main to have the mill, let it cost what it might, for, he thought, if he had it, he would get off having to sail far away over the perilous sea for freights of salt. At first the man would not hear of parting with it, but the skipper begged and prayed, and at last the man sold it to him and got many, many $1,000 for it. When the skipper had got the mill on his back, he did not stay there long, for he was so afraid that the man would change his mind, and he had no time to ask how he was to stop it grinding, but got on board his ship as fast as he could. When he had gone a little way out to sea, he took the mill on deck. "Grind salt, and grind both quickly and well," said the skipper. So the mill began to grind salt, till it spouted out like water, and when the skipper had got the ship filled, he wanted to stop the mill, but whichsoever way he turned it, and how much soever he tried, it went on grinding, and the heap of salt grew higher and higher, until at last the ship sank. There lies the mill at the bottom of the sea, and still, day by day, it grinds on, and that is why the sea is salt.